Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku had Mammal Mutation Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was an alone night. He didn't like the alone nights. They were cold and it was always so much harder to sleep. The two legs would place him in the bright white room all alone and he could never tell what time it was. The sun didn't shine in this room. Instead, smaller suns were placed along the top of the room. But these suns weren't warm. They didn't give off the golden glow that he enjoyed. No. They were white and harsh and cold, just like everything else when he was with the two legs. He would need to do better not to be caught, next. Usually, he would be sleeping in the den. He'd made his own with the help of the foxes and, to his own surprise, the badgers. The badgers didn't really like him, so it was shocking that they had helped him pat it down, making sure the dirt wouldn't cave in on him. Sometimes, the foxes would come curl up next to him. Occasionally one of the cat mothers. It was fairly common for cat mothers with kits too big or cat mothers who had been barren that season to curl up with him. They missed taking care of little ones. He smelled like a little one. His favorite, though, was when his she-wolf would visit. She never minded his form when he slept, unlike the other animals. The animals didn't talk to him, per se. But he could understand their body language. He understood when a deer was angry versus playful. He understood when an owl was hunting or simply enjoying a flight. He mostly understood the packs, though. They had all helped take care of him, so it had been easy to learn their ways. But tonight there would be no warmth. There would be no mothers sneaking into his den to help keep him warm. It was frustrating. He couldn't even keep himself warm if he was trying to sleep for real. The best he could hope to do is get the half rest that he could manage while in the cat form. He would be tired tomorrow when the hidden opening would reveal itself. He'd have to try and stay awake though. It wasn't good to be out at night. It wasn't safe at night. So for now, the boy curled in on himself, green fur keeping him as warm as it could while he half rested. His ears twitched forward and back, always alert despite his eyes being closed. His breathing evened and his tail swished lazily, sensing the surrounding world for any disturbance. He wasn't even consciously aware that he was doing it. It had been ingrained in him since he was a kid. This was the Watcher's sleep. This was the rest that allowed the clan to stay secure. Unlike the wolves, cats didn't have to stay awake to keep watch. The boy's ears twitched as he picked up something faint in the distance. A new sound. New usually meant dangerous. The boy jolted upright and backed into the corner where the secret door would open in a little while. His fur was bristled and a low humming growl was steadily spilling from his throat as the sounds came closer. The two legs, humans, he thinks they were called, came from the other side of the room. It was rare, but when they did, it usually meant hurt. The boy's ear twitched again, this time from memory. He was much smaller, barely old enough to leave the den on his own. The she-wolf had warned him. The queens who had watched over all of the kits had warned him. But he hadn't listened. He went out without telling. He went out at night. The human had scooped him up easily. Even when he changed into his own two-leg form, they didn't run away. It was strange. Usually the others always ran away when he became a two-leg. Maybe it was because these humans were so much bigger than himself? Either way, he was caught. He squirmed relentlessly in their arms. Bruising hands held him back, making sure to keep a good hold on him no matter what form he turned into. First the two-leg form, then the kit, and then a mouse pup. That was the smallest he could go for now. But no matter how small he got, nothing worked. So he decided to grow bigger. He usually didn't like to do this because it hurt, but he was desperate. As he turned into the tiger, the human finally had to let him go. He was still much smaller than the human, but had grown bigger than his normal size and his muscles ached. Despite still being smaller than he had hoped, the human had finally released him. Perhaps it was the added bonus of his claws and teeth. No matter, as soon as his feet hit the ground, he ran. Unfortunately, that didn't last long. A sharp sting radiated from his hind and then the world became fuzzy, and his steps became uneven, his legs were weak, he was so tired. When he woke up, it was in the white room. It was the first time and his entire body screamed for him to run, but there was nowhere to go. Something was keeping him in his own two-leg form, unable to change, and that was terrifying. He was defenseless like this. His ear ached and pounded and made his head spin. Upon further inspection, there was a cold ring circling the area. He used to have a ring like this around his neck, but he had recently figured out the mouse form and it had fallen off. After just a few hours, or what the boy thought was hours, the small hatch had opened and he was let free. His ear had hurt for days, but eventually, the pounding stopped and he had grown used to the ring on his ear. Eventually, other animals had started to be caught and their neck rings were replaced with the ear rings as well. That warm season had certainly been a strange one. That, of course, wasn't the worst hurt that the humans had put him through. But it was the first that he could remember, and it was the start of the regular captures. After that, every moon cycle, he would be captured one way or another. It was like the humans always knew where he was. It was scary. His nose wasn't that good in the two-leg form, though maybe it was just because he was small. Either way, every dark moon, he would find himself in the White Room. An alone night. Sometimes, they would poke him with needles. Sometimes they would make him run through a maze or do some other game. Other times they would simply leave him be. And then he would be released. But tonight, there was noise. Something was happening in the normally quiet White, and the boy was completely trapped. He could only hope it was just another game, but the energy in the air told him otherwise. He could smell fear. He could smell blood. The noises grew louder and louder as whatever it was came closer to the White Room. The boy pushed even further into the corner, cursing the lack of escape. The door where the two legs usually emerged slid open. A bunch of new two legs, wearing bright colors so unlike the white he was used to seeing the humans wear, stood in the door. One walked forward slowly. He was so big compared to the small cat form the boy was in, so he made himself grow. The closer the two-leg got, the more dangerous. He need to scare him off. So he made himself into the tiger again, growling and hissing at the man to stay back. When that didn't work, he tried a wolf form. He was a little smaller in this form, but his teeth were longer. He looked more threatening when he pulled back his lips to snarl. The man paused at this, lowering his body and holding out a hesitant hand. The other humans in white had done this before, right before they stuck him with the needles. The boy snapped at the hand, his jaws circling around the outstretched appendage and tearing into the soft skin. There were a lot of bones in hands, but with his wolf jaws it was easy to snap them. It was easy to make the man howl in pain. The man's hands were much stronger than normal, his bones much harder to break. When his teeth sank inside the skin, a striking energy seemed to course through his body, making him yelp along with the man. All of a sudden, he felt himself shift. His wolf form and two-leg form were the same size, so there was no shrinking or growing, but he could always tell. His skin itched as his fur sunk in to reveal the pink and brown skin. His teeth ached as they shortened and grew back up into his skull as his muzzle shortened. His muscles felt a little more free as his hind legs were freed from their four-leg position into the two-leg position. The switch was jolting. The teeth in the man's hand no longer met each other in the middle of the flesh. His jaw, in fact, could hardly manage the appendage at all. Switching back forced him to let go, his defense gone. He was cornered again, and this time he was weak, no claws, no teeth, he wasn't even fast in this form. The boy whimpered again, backing into the corner once more and lowering himself as much as he could. If he couldn't scare them away, he needed to show that he wasn't a threat. Maybe he could play dead. Maybe then they would leave him alone. Another man had stepped forward. He had glowing red eyes just like the possums at night. His fur was floating above his head menacingly, just like when the leader of the pack puffs up his fur during a fight. The boy whimpered again, twisting himself onto his back and presenting his neck to try and put the alpha at ease. He was just a pup, after all. The leader doesn't hurt pups, especially if they show respect. The man's eyes stopped glowing and his hair dropped as he came a little closer. Though he was less threatening now, he was still a human. He was still scary, and the boy fought with himself over whether to keep the SBMSSV actions or whether to lash out again. It wasn't like this man was part of a pack or clan. He could still be dangerous. What would make him less likely to cause pain? The man was crouching almost directly in front of him, showing his hands but not moving to touch. The boy hunched back, body trembling in the corner. He felt small. He wanted to be smaller, so he pulled at the core of his body to try and shift again, and for some reason, it worked this time. He had shifted to a small mouse, much more capable of scurrying into the corner. However, instead of remaining in the corner, he moved to the edge of the wall where the secret door always opened. Something was making a clicking sound, and that usually meant? Yes. The hatch was barely a centimeter open when the boy darted through. A hand grasped at his tail as he fled, but he was too quick. When he was halfway to the tree line, he once again lost hold on this form and was forced back into a two-leg form. The forced shift made him nauseous, but he kept running. The building sat on the edge of 5 acres of forest, surrounded by electric fencing. It wasn't particularly hard to infiltrate, but it certainly wasn't easy. Aizawa had been tasked with scoping out the facility so that a plan of attack could be prepared. Thus far, he had managed entry into the vents without detection. It was uncomfortably stuffy in the narrow air vents, but luckily, he still somehow fit enough to move about. The police had gotten word that the facility was illegally tagging wild animals and running experiments on them, so Aizawa was sent in to confirm the claim. It should have been a one-night venture, but now he was working on day 3, climbing through vents so that he wouldn't be spotted. After a few hours, Aizawa finally came upon a major room. Monitors lined the walls as a group of people dressed in white lab coats wrote in journals about whatever it was they were observing. A few chattered quietly to each other, their words making Aizawa tense. "We'll need to weigh him this time. I say we give him the drugged water to make it go quicker." A man with dark black hair and a crew cut spoke. "No way. We are already giving the specimen Quirk suppressants. I refuse to have more drags interfering with my blood work. If you can't handle a child, then we will get another person who can," said the woman with the too long neck. "That child nearly bit my hand off last time I went near," the man said hotly. "It is part of the experiment. At least he is showing preservative instincts. A few more years and we can start assimilating him back into society." The third, a man who was smoking a cigarette, spoke up. "But for now, he's still acting like a beast. How the hell do you expect me to handle a FING tiger? He's nearly reaching full growth." Crew cut cried out, drawing a few glares from nearby observers. "He will have Quirk suppressants. He won't be able to use his tiger form," came the smoker's reply. "Doubtful." Crew cut grumbled. "Remember last time? The suppressants wore off way faster than you geniuses thought they would. As his handler, you should do as I say. He needs a sedative or I'm not going near him. Good luck finding one of your nerds to do so." "Quirk suppressants? Sedatives? A boy? Did they have a child here?" "Sir. He's changed back to his human form. Looks like he is attempting to make a tool again." "Holy shit, they have a child. In the woods." The smoker looked up pleased. "Human nature at its finest. Make sure you document his every action. The supplies he uses. The types of knots if he makes, if any. Detail any tests he performs to see if the tool works." Many of the observers nodded, scooting forward in their seats as they scribbled more quickly into their notes. Aizawa did his best to find a better angle so that he could see the monitors as well, but no matter what he did, he couldn't get a good view. He sighed after a while and ultimately decided to head back. This mission just became much more serious if there was a child involved. Back at the station, Aizawa debriefed the detective on the information he had gathered. At the mention of the child, Tsukachi had jumped into action. "Are you sure, Eraserhead? You saw a child on the screen?" Aizawa sighed once more, massaging the bridge of his nose. "No. I only heard the conversation. I didn't get a good view of the screens. Did they only mention the one or could there be more?" "I only heard mention of one kid, but that doesn't mean much. I only stuck around for a few minutes." Tsukachi sat back in his chair, face grim as he thought. "You work for yourself," he stated. Aizawa raised a brow. "Before you ask me to get more involved, please remember that I also work at UA during the day now." "Yes. Yes," Tsukachi tapped his fingers on his desk as he looked out the window. "Nizu may be helpful. He can let you off for a bit too. Mind to tell me what it is you are thinking?" Aizawa asked, dreading the answer. If Tsukachi was looking to involve Nizu, the principal of UA High School and a genius madman of a person, then this probably wouldn't end very well for Aizawa. If there is a child involved, there could be more. This might be trafficking. It might be illegal human experimentation. This could be much more than we thought, and I think the best course may be getting someone on the inside. This may be the answer to the missing children's cases that have been circulating this end of Japan as of late. Aizawa frowned at the speculation. There was very little evidence suggesting that the two were related, but he could understand Tsukachi's hope. It would certainly make his life much easier if they had found a trafficking ring and their base of operations all in one go. Thus, this was how he found himself walking into the observation room, dressed in a white coat, not a month later. The people, despite being cautious, weren't terribly difficult to infiltrate. For once, it seemed that his undercover mission wouldn't take longer than a few months. Aizawa was thrilled at how lax the security seemed to be, but he was also wary. If getting in was this easy, that probably meant that this wasn't the trafficking ring they had hoped to catch and end. This was more likely some small-scale illegal experiment. Not that that wasn't important either, but they had put a lot of resources into this thing, and it would really suck if it turned out to be nothing but small-time villains testing one of their own kids. He was quick to discover this not to be true. The screens were mostly stationary, with 2 hover drones following around what looked to be a kitten, maybe half a year old or so. It certainly wasn't full-grown. The kitten looked like any other cat. Its eyes were dilated in concentration and its hindquarters wiggled while it stalked a bug crawling along in front of it. The only real difference to other cats was its color. The cat was a deep, dark green. Aizawa would almost have mistaken it for black if not for the sun shining on its fur. It was unnatural, even in today's world of quirks. If that were an actual cat, it would not be that color. Of course, it wasn't a real cat. It was a child. After about a week, Aizawa was given permission to look into past notes on the study to better help him determine what actions were important to write down. The child was male, 8 years old with a birthday on July 15. The boy had been part of the study for 5 of those years. His name was listed as Midoriya Izuku. Aizawa had nearly cried out in joy when he read that part. These dumbass had just given him an identity to search. It couldn't get much simpler than that. Midoriya Izuku, it turned out, had gone missing in August, 5 years previous. His mother had taken him to the park. After a chat with another mother, the boy had simply vanished. The mother, Midoriya Inko, was a single mother. She had scoured the city for the boy, searching every nook and cranny with the help of police and concerned citizens. When the case went dead 2 years later, the woman had fallen into a depression. Police were uncertain if the car crash that took the woman's life was on accident or on purpose. The boy was apparently the test subject to compare brain development in the new Quirk generation. In the past, due to unfortunate circumstances, there had been cases of children growing up without human involvement. These children were called feral children. The studies on these cases often explored the adaptation of human language and social skills. They provided research into the question of nature versus nurture and had been a major aspect in understanding the human brain. With the evolution of mankind, however, came the evolution of the mind. Many thought it was more durable, similar to how Quirk people's bodies could often take more damage than humans could in the past. This experiment was testing the durability. It was a sick and convoluted reason to isolate a child, but Aizawa held his tongue, continuing to study the boy along with other observers while he fed information to the police and Nizu, who was now extremely interested in the case. Aizawa had figured out that the boy was the only one being tested but had also learned that more powerful people were behind the experiment than the ones present. His current task had evolved from gathering information to get the kid out, to taking down the heavy hitters so that this wouldn't happen again. Unfortunately, that meant allowing the kid to continue as he was, a test subject to twisted minds. This was no longer a mission that would be complete in a couple months. Now, he was looking at least 6 months of undercover work, and Aizawa was dreading every second. Every day he was forced to go observe a child who was being forced to live and fend for himself. He was forced to watch the boy traverse not only dangerous animals that often snapped at him, but also the elements. Aizawa had started the investigation in fall. By winter, he already knew to dread what he was going to witness. The old notes made mention of starvation, cannibalism, and sickness. Luckily, the boy had escaped the worst, but each season brought about new struggles. Currently, this would be the first winter that the boy would be on his own. The other groups, including the wolves, foxes, cats, and even rabbits, had driven the boy away to his own den. He was getting older and they were growing more weary of the kid. They weren't hostile and still took care of the boy to some extent, but it wasn't how it had been in the past. The animals may completely abandon him when things became too difficult. Who knew what would actually happen? The kid took on the first snowfall with wary confidence. He had gone to many of his old mothers, as the scientists called them, and had collected the shed fur, adding it to his nest of leaves in his underground den. He rarely walked around in his human form, which was completely naked, opting to remain in his wolf form more than anything, as it had grown a thick winter coat, offering a much lighter green fur color. Unfortunately, the boy couldn't hold the form when sleeping and had quickly figured out that he was much colder without bodies to share the warmth. That was when a major breakthrough happened. At least, the scientists called it a breakthrough. The boy had been struggling to find the plants he typically ate and had ultimately assisted the wolves in hunting down rabbits. Each time he grasped the animals, he would sob and tears would leak down his face as he broke the creature's neck. Apparently, these rabbits were once his den mates. But starvation leads you to perform desperate acts, and this kid was no exception. In turn for helping capture and kill the rabbits, the wolves allowed the kid to take some of the pelts and a rabbit or two for his own needs. The boy, at first, had simply taken 2 rabbit carcasses that the wolves had finished with and had tried to dig out the rest of the meat from the inside to eat and keep the remains to huddle around, but the stench and rot must have gotten to him quickly as he eventually buried the rotting animals. The second time, the kid had gone and found a sharp rock that he often used to help him cut plants or entertain himself by carving trees. He used the rock to skin the rabbits, albeit sloppily. However, it seemed to work. He washed the pelts in the river to clean them of blood and then let them dry out. Soon enough, he had a good collection of furs to help keep him warm while he slept. Each time the boy aided in killing the animals, he would sob, tears cascading down his face. The wolves would often nip at him for it, a reprimand. One of the observers to his side had informed Aizawa that the wolves often seemed to tease or get angry at the boy for being sensitive. The animals simply didn't understand why he was so distraught over prey. Of course, the wolves felt empathy too, just for their own, not for what they viewed as food. The animals didn't understand that to the kid. The rabbits were his kin and he was essentially aiding in the slaughter of one of the families that had protected him when he was smaller. The boy rarely ate the meat in his human form, opting to take on the form of whatever creature he was sharing his food with, in most cases, the wolves. However, that didn't stop him from also partaking when he was in his human form during desperate times. It seemed that when the child was hurt or tired, using his quirk was much more difficult. Thus, when the kid got sick with a cold a few weeks into winter, Aizawa got to experience his first time watching a human child tear into an animal carcass. He nearly puked as he watched the mostly blunt teeth gnaw at the skin, trying to break its way to the softer meat. The child's tears mixed with the blood that flooded down the kid's chin and chest, unnerving the hero. Aizawa eventually had to turn away. It was cruel what they were forcing on this child. It was cruel that Aizawa was allowing it to continue. But he had to find the head. Without knowing who had put this experiment into motion, it could happen to another child. So, this boy would have to continue in this way. At least the boy was used to it. Winter seemed to drag on much longer than any other winter and Aizawa ached for the boy. He rarely slept and only ate when he was forced to. Nizu and Aizawa's boyfriend, Yamada, often had to force food on him just so that the man would have the energy to get out of bed. At first, Aizawa had thought they didn't realize that he was purposefully trying to have a reason not to go into the hellhole where he was currently working, but eventually, he realized that they understood very clearly what he was trying to do. We must find the mastermind of this experiment. You are already on the inside, so you are our best hope. Just stick with it a tad longer, Aizawa-kun. Nizu had said one day, after Aizawa had nearly had a complete breakdown. Yamada, on the other hand, was much more understanding. His gaze was gentle and his hands gently brushed back Aizawa's hair. It's for the kid and any other kids that could possibly face what he is going through right now. It's only a little longer. If anyone can do this terrible job, it's you, Sho. Don't give up. That boy needs you. We can just get him out now. Aizawa had shouted back, pain and anger coursing through his veins. What kind of hero am I to just watch this happen to the kid day in and day out? This is effed up, Hizashi. You don't see what that kid is forced to do to survive. Yamada only leaned in, hugging Aizawa close to his chest. He's never been held. Aizawa spluttered. He never gets spoken to and he's rarely acknowledged positively. It's cruel. If we get him out now, it will just happen to another kid. You are doing so good, Sho. Just a little longer. Aizawa wasn't typically one to have breakdowns, but this job was slowly destroying his spirit. He would probably need a break from hero work for a bit before he could get his head on straight again. He'd probably need therapy too. How he hated therapy. Luckily, each season has an end, and come spring, things seemed to look up for the boy that he watched 5 days a week. The kid went back to a diet of mostly fruit, vegetables, and bugs, only occasionally sharing meat when it was brought to him. He didn't shiver through the night any longer and his eyes seemed to light up during the day. The boy was a lot more playful and was often found playing with the wolf cubs or cats during the day. It seemed that he was much more welcome with the cats once many of the females started having kittens. The cats would seek him out and groom the kid once he changed into that form. Aizawa quickly realized it was because the boy would bring them dead lizards, fish, or occasional bird that he had managed to catch, providing the nursing mother cats with free food. The boy didn't seem to have any qualms with catching and killing any non-mammals, of which Aizawa attributed to not being able to become of those things. The boy, just like most of the other creatures, only saw them as food. It begged to question if the boy would react differently if he could change into lizards and birds, too. Was he showing a greater level of empathy because he could understand the creatures he became to a greater extent, or was he showing the greater level of empathy because he associated the mammals with warmth and as food givers? These were questions that made Aizawa shudder whenever he thought them. More than anything, he did not want to start thinking like these monstrous people. He did not want to be curious about these things when that curiosity had led to such cruelty. Spring came and went, along with the first part of summer. The boy was still malnourished, but he clearly had more energy during these days. He was happy in a way that animals could be happy. Survival came first, but he always found time to relax or jump around. Once, he had locked onto the 2 cameras that always followed him around. He seemed to find them amusing as he leapt up over and over in the form of a panther while he tried to catch them. It was almost like a game to the kid. It was reminiscent of when he chased after birds. Did the boy even realize that these things were watching him? Did he realize that they weren't alive? Come the boy's 9th birthday, Aizawa got a major shock and beautiful breakthrough. Kamiyama Yami was the head of countless hospitals spanning the northern areas of Japan. His family was loaded and he invested a bunch of money into psychological research. The man was well known in the community and praised for his ingenuity in the field of psychology. He was also standing right to Aizawa's left. He had finally found the head. He would relish in cutting it off. The man apparently visited every year, according to the scientist beside Aizawa. The observer had stars in his eyes as he spoke about the man who had started this illegal project. It wasn't hard to gain more information from there. As soon as he relayed the information and video evidence, plans were formed to simultaneously arrest Kamiyama and the scientists in the facility. The kid was finally being rescued. The only pity would be how traumatic the sudden change would be for the child. The kid was brought into the facility every new moon for testing. During these times, the kid was given tests to determine how physically fit he was doing as well as to observe his behavior in an isolated setting. Every staff member was required to be on site during these times as the kid's reactions were extremely important to write down and observe for some reason. The plan was to save the kid, then. The new moon just so happened to be at the end of the next week. Aizawa was thrilled. The man could hardly keep himself from running in and grabbing the boy from the forest on his own but stuck with the plan to ensure victory. Come July 23rd, the plan finally went into action. Aizawa went into work a little later than was typical, at 1800 hours, but took a detour on his way to the observatory. He shut down all of the security systems in place and knocked out and tied up the guards that watched the monitors. Luckily, everyone in the facility thought he had a small intelligence quirk, giving a slight edge to Aizawa should things reduce to a fight. The kid was brought into the facility at 1900 hours, unconscious. He was weighed quickly. He'd gained since the past month, luckily. His vitals were checked. All normal. He would not be receiving any drags or testing tonight as only his behavior was to be observed. Heroes entered the premises at 20. Fighting broke out between the staff and the heroes at 20. The staff were caught off guard when Aizawa joined the hero side and effectively cancelled out their quirks with his own, making capture significantly easier. They were even more surprised when All Might, of all people, showed up, effectively ending the fight with his presence alone as most of the staff simply surrendered. All Might's involvement was most likely thanks to Tsukachi, who had a strong connection with the man. It irked Aizawa a bit, but he shook the feeling off. He led a group, including All Might, down the hall, taking down any staff member with ease and passing them to the police so that each could be brought to the main room. By the time they reached the kid's door, every staff member was accounted for and captured. Only 5 heroes had gotten involved. Aizawa, All Might, Pixie Bob, Ingenium, and Nizu. The last was currently camping out in Aizawa's capture weapon, warning the group of heroes that the child inside may attack. It was a caution that none of those present needed. They had all seen some of the video evidence that Aizawa had provided. The boy was still in his cat form when Aizawa opened the door. He was huddled against the far corner, where the opening to the forest was. The cat's ears were flat against its head, and the hair around his body was puffed up. It hissed when they entered. All Might stepped forward and the cat hissed even louder, mewing loudly in a warning for the man to back off. All Might was unfazed. When the boy turned into a tiger, however, he gave slight pause. The tiger was in the same defensive position and was growling low in its throat, eyes watching each person in the room warily. When none of the heroes backed away, the child shifted again. This time to a wolf form. This one caused Pixie Bob to back up a step as the boy bared his fangs, growling and barking loudly. All Might slowly settled down on his knees in front of the child, coaxing him closer with his words. The boy did not relax, his haunches rising the longer the heroes stayed in the room. When All Might held out a gentle hand, trying not to frighten the boy, the kid moved. It happened so quickly that even All Might was unable to react as the wolf's jaws clamped around his hand. All Might yelped and tried to pull back, but the wolf growled and bit down harder, shaking its head slightly to keep All Might from doing anything stupid. After a second, the wolf, too, was making small yelping noises as small sparks of yellow lightning flickered from the wound on All Might's hand. "I think my quirk is causing him pain, unintentionally," All Might said through grit teeth. Aizawa sighed as he moved forward, activating his quirk on the boy and causing him to turn back to his human form. There was probably no point in trying to get the kid to come with them willingly. With the life he had had, force would be necessary at first. It would be easier if the kid didn't have claws and dagger-like teeth to fight back with. As soon as the boy switched back, his jaw now too small to allow him to keep biting at All Might's large hand, he let go of the number 1 hero, backing away into the corner once more with a whimper. The boy whimpered again and knelt down on the ground, curling in on himself while he continued to watch the group. The bright green eyes were filled with unshed tears as he looked up at the heroes with pure fear. Aizawa stepped forward this time, keeping his quirk activated as he walked forward. He knew it was intimidating, but in this case, that might actually work in their favor. When the boy looked at him, something in his expression changed. He rolled over onto his back, craning his neck outward while still keeping his sights on every person in the room. It looked awkward and uncomfortable, but Aizawa recognized the position. The kid saw him as a higher-up, similar to how the wolf hierarchy worked. Or, at least the kid was trying to appease him as if he were a higher-up, most likely an alpha from how he was completely prostrating himself. Aizawa let his quirk go at this reaction. The boy was submitting. That was unnerving. But also good. He could work with that. Aizawa crouched down low, keeping his hands visible for the boy. It only served to make the kid jolt back into the corner, crouching as if he were still in animal form. Aizawa could make out the small trembles racking the child's frame. Someone passed a blanket to his side and Aizawa grabbed it. Just as he was about to offer the warmth to the child, the kid shrunk. At first, Aizawa wasn't sure what had happened, but then his eyes had found the small mouse scuttling close to the wall. Aizawa understood what was happening too late, as the hatch opened and the mouse quickly darted back out into the woods. Nizu jumped out the latch after the boy and Aizawa activated his quirk once more, causing the child to grow and stumble slightly. It wasn't enough, though, as the kid entered the tree line and Aizawa lost sight of him. Nizu sighed and scratched at his ear before turning around and re-entering the room through the hatch. Well, that could have gone better. The principal said in a much too cheery voice for the situation. Who is up for a search in the woods? Aizawa groaned as he rubbed a hand down his face. An hour later, once all the criminals had been taken to the police station, Aizawa brought up the tracking device screen on the monitors. The hatch had opened when one of the researchers had tried to run away, only to be tackled into the control panel and hitting the switch at just the wrong time. Aizawa typed a few things into the same control panel, this time setting the mobile cameras to go in search of the boy. After a few minutes, the cameras locked in on his tracking device. He was with the wolf pack. Of course. He was. That's going to be a problem. Aizawa drawled. They even took him into a den. They are in protection mode. How long until you think they will calm down? Nizu asked as he observed the screens. Probably a few weeks. Too long to wait. Wolves, don't forget. He said, trying to think of ways to get the kid out of there without hurting some of the only beings that the kid is actually attached to. Well, there is no point in trying so late when everyone is exhausted. I suggest everyone get a bit of rest. We can watch the child in shifts. I'll take first watch. The rodent said, a smile still gracing his lips. The other heroes seemed resigned to their fates as they all headed towards the sleeping quarters of the facility. Scientists on the graveyard shift often took turns in much the same way, and Aizawa's anxiety had him pause. Was Nizu going to continue the experiment? Aizawa shook his head sharply at the thought. He would definitely need therapy after this sheet. After escaping the new humans, the boy soon reached the pack, his two-leg form shaking despite the warmth of the midsummer night. He wanted a mother. We wanted to be cared for, and he wanted his fur to be groomed. He was getting a little big for that now, but the wolves never faulted the older pups for needing attention when something scary happened. It had been a few moon cycles since he had been directly in the wolf territory, and much longer since he had entered in his two-leg form, but the boy was terrified. He knew he was giving off a strong scent of fear even if he couldn't currently smell it himself. Leader came up almost immediately. Huffing loudly and stalking up close. Leader didn't like it when he used his two-leg form. He could tell that it was the boy, but the scent was just a little too funny, too human. The boy tried pulling for a shift again and was ecstatic when it worked. He rolled to his back as soon as he had shifted, apologizing but also visibly shaking in fear. Leader grunted and nosed in him, giving permission to stand back up. As soon as he had, a she-wolf, his first nursing mother came up and nipped at his scruff. The boy nosed into her, keening his fear and searching for the comfort that he knew she could provide. The older she-wolf allowed him to and nuzzled him to follow her back to the den. They couldn't really speak, but his motions had given enough information. Something bad had happened. His form when he came upon the camp along with his smell gave more, it had to do with the two legs. As the mother tucked him into her side as if she were still a nursing mother, despite not having borne pups for many seasons, the leader was gathering the warriors. Watch would be doubled tonight. The pack would need to be on high alert now that the boy might have brought danger their way. The pack wasn't angry at the boy, luckily. They knew he had no true pack. They knew it was either them or the cats, and many were proud that he had chosen them to be his protectors instead of the aloof felines. However, they were nervous and scared at the idea of a new danger. The boy cuddled close to the she-wolf, the alpha she-wolf. He was being protected by the best, and that brought further comfort to his mind as he slowly, finally, drifted off. Come morning, the pack had not encountered any disturbances. The boy was nuzzled towards the entrance and brought towards the center of the pack. He was to be questioned about the danger. He had never completely understood the language of any animal, which was going to make this much more difficult. The annoyed reactions of the pack members showed that they knew this would be a long process as well. As he entered the circle, the alpha she-wolf guiding him, he bowed his head to show respect. Leader was waiting for him already, standing proudly. The boy went up and gently licked at Leader's muzzle before backing away and sitting. The boy had an odd place in the pack. He was still small, still counted as a pup, but he had been a pup for a long time. He aged much slower than the wolves, and that put him in a funny gray area. He showed dominant traits when playing with the other pups and would most likely have been a gamma, or middle of the pack, wolf if he had been normal. But the boy was not normal. In fact, he was extremely strange, and that strangeness lowered his position. When he was full grown, he'd most likely be made the omega, the lowest wolf in the pack. When that happened, the boy would have only the cats to look towards for comfort. He would not take the bullying from his family, despite pack law. For now, however, he was still respected as a pup bridging adolescence. He had a place in the pack and was to be protected, despite his oddities and current living situation outside the pack. Leader fixed the boy with a stern look, a huff emitting from his chest. A demand. He wanted to know what happened. The boy turned counterclockwise twice. Strangers. A ripple ran through the pack as they looked at the boy with unease. Leader flicked his ears. Wolf strangers? The boy swayed his head before rising onto his hind legs for a moment. 2 legs. Growls and yips came from the surrounding pack. None of them cared for the white-clad 2 legs. They only brought pain and trouble. The only 2 leg allowed near was the green one standing in the middle. And he was only given permission because he was also a wolf. The boy was a part of the forest. He was a part of all animal kin. He was safe, if a little strange. Leader was not happy with the confirmation that it was 2 legs, just as he had suspected the night before. The large wolf stood, tail swishing as he made a low noise in his throat, shifting his body in multiple ways before sitting back down. The boy knew he had been asked something. He knew, but it was so hard sometimes. Wolves were very advanced in their movements. They had to be to effectively hunt as a group. But, the boy was not adept at picking up each shiver of fur. It may take him a few times to understand. Thus, the boy tilted his head to the side, bowing low in apology before focusing on Leader intently as he made the same move. The boy keened when he finally understood, dropping to his stomach with his ears back, half rolled on his side. It was not a question that Leader had asked. Not really. Leader had suggested that he go back to his own den. He had suggested to send a watch to look after him. Everyone knew that the boy was taken by the 2 legs more than any other animal. The 2 legs were curious things, like pups to some extent, but they were dangerous in their curiosity. As a half 2 leg, it was suggested that the boy handle the situation himself. The pack would help if real trouble came to him, but they did not want direct involvement. The boy, of course, begged for mercy. These 2 legs were not like the ones in white. They seemed stronger. They seemed more dangerous. They were Mew, and new was bad. New meant death. The pack had taught him that. Even as the boy begged to be helped, the alpha she-wolf stepped up, growling low at her mate in opposition. The boy had been in her last set of pups, so she still saw him as her own, despite the other pups having long since grown up. It was almost unheard of for older she-wolves to still hold title as alpha, but no other female had yet to best her in a fight. The she-wolf had been leader before she became too old. Thus, leader now mated with the beta she-wolf to produce pups, with the permission of the alpha she-wolf, of course. The alpha she-wolf understood the need for the pack to continue to produce, and so, had allowed it easily. Thus, her opinion held much weight in the pack. That is, unless someone took her down. To the boy's dismay, it seemed an attempt would be happening. The other wolves were bristling. They agreed with leader. The boy picked up on motions such as, too old, and, dethrone. His ears flattened against his head as the alpha she-wolf stepped in front of him protectively, growling an acceptance of any challenge. The beta she-wolf stepped forward, and the boy scurried to the back of the pack, other wolves moving away from him, leaving him isolated, even inside the circle. The fight began with circling. Both she-wolves were sizing one another up. The boy whined, pleading to stop, but none listened. If the alpha she-wolf fought and lost, it would mean her life. She was too old now. It was either keep her position and prove herself a strong fighter still, or die. The fight went on for a while. It was vicious, more so than most dethroning fights. Blood splattered the ground when the fight came to a pause. The alpha she-wolf was badly bitten, limping slightly as the two circled once more. The beta she-wolf was also hurt, but not nearly to the same extent. It was already clear who the victor would be. Alpha she-wolf eyed the other intently. It was dishonorable to back down at this point in life. She would not die a coward's death. The bite to her neck was quick. As soon as her body fell, the boy ran over, whimpering and keening. He nosed the she-wolf's neck and moved close to her side, trying to make her wake up. The other wolves bowed their head in respect to her last fight. They knew. There was no question after that bite. The boy keened louder, howling a little in between as he mourned the one constant mother he had gained. The cats and foxes and bunnies had raised him as well. The first two always switched who would nurse him, and the last, well, he had killed his rabbit mothers in order to survive the winter, hadn't he? His alpha she-wolf was the strongest connection he had made, and it was gone, now. After a little bit, Leader came forward, grabbing the boy by the scruff and moving him away from the body. A warning nip to the nose told him to quiet down. The boy did his best to stop his keening and focus on Leader. Leader's eyes were sad. He had mated with her after the last male alpha's death and had known her since he was a cub. Despite the disagreement, he would still honor her in death by being the best he could. That meant protecting the pack. In all honesty, the boy was not really a part of the pack. He would be sent a guard of 2 wolves to protect him if something happened, but he would not be allowed in the main area. There were smaller pups in the main area. They needed to be protected above him. The boy keened again, moving up to Leader and liking at his muzzle once more, presenting his neck in one last plea. Leader nipped him on the nose again. His plea was denied. Leader looked back to the old alpha she-wolf and huffed sadly before looking back at the boy. He would stay for the rest of the day. He was the last pup, after all. It would be honorable for him to help Leader send his previous mate on to the afterlife. It would give the boy a little more time to grieve, as well. Pups needed moms and the boy was still young. It was devastating to lose the she-wolf, even if the boy was bridging the point of adolescence. Even if the boy had been alone for many moons by now. The other wolves dispersed with the exception of 2 guards. Leader went over to the dead she-wolf and laid beside her, his paw covering hers in a protective manner. The boy followed suit, opting to move into her side once more as he continued to keen and cry. Midoriya Izuku. Midoriya Izuku. Midoriya Izuku. Aizawa chanted in his mind. He had known the kid's name since his first week but had always called the boy Kid in his head. If he was caught using the boy's actual name, when the scientists were to call him Specimen 0001, it would have blown his cover. So now, with the other heroes around him calling the boy by name, he was trying his best to retrain himself quickly. It was early morning, the sun had yet to rise and no sign of the boy was present on the monitors. However, a meeting was clearly occurring between the alpha male and the 3 beta wolves. That could be bad. Animals were odd and finicky, but Aizawa had learned over his time that wolves were incredibly similar to humans. They held group meetings and seemed to have a language all their own to discuss problems affecting the pack. If some of the strongest members were getting together, it usually meant that a larger pack meeting was soon to follow. Nizu was going through different ideas on getting the kid out of the den when the sun finally peeked over the horizon. At the first rays of light, a wolf entered the old she-wolf's den who used to be alpha, or maybe might still be alpha. Aizawa wasn't exactly sure how that worked. Something is happening, Aizawa said, interrupting Nizu mid-sentence. The principal didn't seem to mind as he turned to look at the screen. In a matter of seconds, the guard wolf exited, followed closely by the kid, Midoriya, and the elderly she-wolf. The she-wolf was standing over Midoriya protectively, nipping at his scruff now and then when he would slow. The boy's ears were pulled back and his tail was tucked as he and the she-wolf entered the pack circle. Aizawa pointed out the male alpha and explained what was happening to the best of his ability as the old she-wolf, who was taking an alpha's place next to the male alpha, went to her spot and Midoriya greeted the leader of the pack. Then, something strange. Aizawa had never actually seen a wolf meeting as they typically happened after his shift, but it was clear the kid, Midoriya, was speaking to the leader. Ruffles of fur and certain movements passed between the two. At one point, Midoriya even stood on his hind legs for a moment. Aizawa was almost 100% certain that the boy was speaking of humans in that moment. He has a language. Nizu marveled. They all do. I would bet that this pack evolved from a quirked wolf. It is not common to see such obvious conversation. Or perhaps, it has to do with Midoriya's involvement. Aizawa closed his eyes, trying to calm himself. Nizu was speaking just like one of his co-workers, and it put him on edge. Don't sound so interested, Aizawa snapped. This isn't a treasure trove of information, it's a tragedy. It's abuse and neglect to the highest level. The principal hummed. I think it is both. There is certainly much to make up for, but it is a situation that should be studied. I do not believe that this experiment should have ever been carried out, but it has happened and we should not let it go to waste. Aizawa growled in his throat for a moment, turning his attention back to the monitor when all of the wolves suddenly shifted. The group looked much more hostile than it had a few seconds before. The old she-wolf was standing protectively over Midoriya, her whole body blocking his from view of the cameras. After a bit, another wolf came forward. That's the beta, I think, unless there can be two female alphas. Either way, she bears the wolf cubs now. Aizawa supplied, watching intently. After a few seconds where both wolves growled at one another, Midoriya scurried back, out from under the older she-wolf. The kid ran to the back of the circle of wolves, only to be quickly abandoned as the other wolves moved to different spots. The following fight left Aizawa in shock. The older she-wolf had been seriously maimed and then killed in front of the pack. In front of the kid. The following whimpers and keens from the boy had Aizawa clutching the table so hard his knuckles were white. The boy was nuzzling into the dead wolf pitifully, his high-pitched sounds echoing his grief. Eventually, the leader pulled the boy away and another, less odd conversation occurred between the two. Midoriya seemed to be asking permission for something, only to be turned down. After that, the wolf pack dispersed and the leader went over to the dead she-wolf and laid beside her. Midoriya slowly walked over as well, the keening starting up in earnest as he once more cuddled into the dead wolf's side. Aizawa couldn't pull his eyes away from the screen. None of the heroes could. After a while, discussion started to resume. The kid was clearly not in a good situation, despite not being in danger, per se. However, the wolves were clearly extremely intelligent and they had no qualms with killing. Eventually, it was decided that the stealthier heroes would need to shoot the wolves with tranquilizers. They didn't want to harm the animals, after all. Tranquilizers were ordered and plans to help control the boy once he was caught were made. It was decided that it would be best to get the child after dark, when the boy was most likely attempting to sleep. The wolves would also be less active, making it a little easier to put them into the drag-induced sleep. Aizawa was handed a tranquilizing gun at 19:05, just before the sun set, the leader moved, followed by the boy. The leader and two guard wolves walked with the boy to his own personal den. The kid's ears were drawn back and he walked slowly behind them, looking back now and then in fear. They aren't permitting him to stay with the pack. Nizu commented, his brows furrowing in displeasure. I assume that is what the fight was about. Aizawa grunted in agreement. Cameras had been set up in the den shortly after it had been created. Aizawa switched to that view as the boy entered, splitting the screen with the outside view. The two guard wolves lay down right outside the entrance, alert but relaxed. The boy inside the den let go of his transformation, turning back into his human form. He looked exhausted as he sat down in the nest he had created for himself. His face was red and tears were still streaming down his cheeks. The boy was quiet, though. After a moment of stillness, the boy hugged himself and curled his legs up under his chin, rocking back and forth as he often did when he felt lonely and scared. Eventually, around 2200 hours he finally fell asleep. Aizawa set out with Ingenium and Nizu. The latter was once again tucked into his scarf. Knocking out the two guard wolves wasn't difficult. A well-timed shot from both he and Ingenium had them down within a minute. Ingenium ran Nizu down to the cave opening quickly while Aizawa kept a lookout for any other wolves or creatures that may pose a threat. Nizu was supposed to administer a human tranquilizer to the kid before he was taken out of the small forest. Based on the yowl that emanated from the den, Nizu's plan did not go as well as they had hoped. Nizu came scurrying out of the den quickly, a needle completely full of meds still clutched in his hand. Ingenium backed away quickly as the boy ran out of his cave from a separate entrance. Aizawa made chase, erasing the kid's quirk just as his cat form started shrinking. The boy rolled over himself as his larger body came into existence. He screamed, howled, yelped, and hissed as Aizawa wrapped him in his capture scarf. Not a single human sound escaping his lips. Aizawa called over his radio for Ingenium to follow and, in a matter of seconds, Nizu and Ingenium arrived. The principal finally administered the drag and the boy's struggle soon died out as it took effect. The beeping sound was the first thing he was aware of. And then, the cold, and then, the white. Another white room. Another alone night? But the boy had thought he had gotten back out to the forest. Wasn't he in the den with the she-wolf? The she-wolf. His first nursing mother, she was gone, wasn't she? She'd been killed and then he was kicked out of the pack. But that means he should be in his den, not in the white room. The boy whimpered as his head began pounding from the strain of trying to remember. As he took stock of his body, the boy realized that it wasn't just his head that hurt. His legs and arms and chest and, well, everything. It was all in pain. Why was he in pain? Did the two legs do something again? But this pain wasn't like the normal pain that the two legs put him through. This was more like the ache from when he slept funny. Or the dull thrum from when he ran for too long. The boy looked around, then, finally taking in more than the white and the fake suns lined up in rows above him. He was on some type of nest. It was much more soft than his nest in his den, but it hurt his back. He was laying down in it funny, not curled up like when he fell asleep normally. There was a giant white leaf covering him, though it felt more like fur, just less fuzzy. It was so odd. It reminded him of the rabbit furs he'd used to keep warm. If that was the thing's purpose, then it wasn't doing a great job. He was freezing and this giant leaf fur pelt thing was too thin to be much help. Over to the left was more white, though a little gray and brown had been added in. A big, flat rock lined one wall of this den. It was like the floor of the White Room, but raised up high. Why would there need to be another floor level in a den with only one occupant? Usually the cats and wolves only made extra levels when the population became bigger. That had only happened one spring, too, when the kits and pups were plentiful. Next to the raised platform was a white closed opening, similar to the one in the White Room. The boy guessed it was probably stuck, just like the other had been, but sat up to go try it out. As his feet hit the floor, something tugged at his arm sharply, making him hiss. It felt like that time that the tree snake had bitten him. He didn't like that feeling. Looking down, the boy saw that his elbow was wrapped up in a material that looked the same as the white leaf pelt thing. However, it felt more rough when he ran a finger over it and the other side was sticky, tugging at his skin when he pulled. There was a clear vine coming from underneath the white wraps, connecting his arm to the machine that was still beeping. His finger had some funny clamp on it too. The clamp was easy to move, but when he tugged on the vine, it only made his arm hurt again. With a hiss, the boy let it go and investigated further. The vine didn't actually lead up to the beeping object, which was now emitting a long, high-pitched sound that was quickly becoming annoying. The vine actually led to some kind of pouch, like the pouches the possums had. But instead of young ones, it held water. That was actually pretty smart. The boy had made bowls from leaves, dried mud, and some really oddly shaped rocks, but this pouch meant that the water wouldn't spill out even if he tripped while holding it. The boy tugged at the bag. It was hanging on a small and thin silvery tree. It wasn't hard to take the bag down. The boy observed the bag with interest, seeing where the vine connected into the thing. With a tug, the vine was released from the bag and the water started leaking out. Not wanting to waste any water and being quite thirsty, the boy took a drink. He knew he wasn't supposed to drink from water that wasn't moving, but he didn't see a river around here and who knew where one might be. Unfortunately, when the water met his lip, it made him GG. The water had an acrid taste that made his mouth feel numb. It burned a little bit as it went down his throat and made his eyes water. With a small growl, the boy tossed the danger water to the ground. He could only hope it wasn't poison like some of the plants in the forest. As he went to stand again, the boy took note of another annoyance. There was a constricting material wrapped around his legs and bottom. The boy pulled and tugged at the offending article until, finally, he figured out that he had to push them down his legs to get out of them. Newly free, the boy moved back to the door, tapping on it a little and then pushing. Nothing happened, of course. The boy didn't think anything would. Only the big two legs could open the closed openings. At a loss of what to do, the boy journeyed over to the other side of the room. There was a purple thing over in this corner. It was made of similar material as the white thing that covered him when he woke, but this material didn't move when he pulled and scratched at it. The thing was fluffy, like the nest he woke up on, but it wasn't big enough to lay down in. The boy stepped up into the thing and crouched. The back of the purple thing was pretty tall and for a little while, the boy enjoyed himself as he ran his fingers over the surface, digging his blunt nails into the back in the kneading motion that he had learned provided food when he was little. When he sat in this thing, it seemed to curl around him like a mother, protecting at least his front side. The longer he sat, the warmer it felt as he shared his body heat with it. The boy knew that the object wasn't alive, but it was comforting and gave him a sense of calm. The old White Room never had anything but the white floors and walls. This one was very clearly a den. Maybe this was where the humans slept. The boy needed the back of the object for a little longer, a purr bubbling in the back of his throat as he relaxed himself. To his disappointment, the purr was cut off quickly as his memories started to come back to him. The boy tensed as the full scene from the last time he was awake washed over him. With a whimper and a resounding growl, the boy hopped off the purple object, hissing as if it had offended him. The new two legs had probably brought that in to trick him, to make him feel comfortable. He wouldn't fall for it, though. He needed to be alert. The boy tried pulling at the center of his chest, hoping for a cat form but was met with a dull ache, instead. His protection had been stripped away again, leaving the boy defenseless once more. He growled deeper in his throat as he stalked about the room, checking every corner and under every object. Nothing seemed to be in the den, but that didn't mean he was safe from something attacking. He didn't want to corner himself, though, so the boy paced the room, back and forth, listening intently to any sounds he may be able to pick up in this form. Every now and then, he would try to pull at his chest, attempting a change, but nothing ever happened. It was so frustrating. It wasn't long before he finally picked up on something from the opposite side of the closed opening. Human sounds. They were garbling the same noises that the new humans had used. There were at least two, based on the different voice sounds. No, three. One was soft, like the gentle early spring breeze when it whispered in his ears. Another was more gruff, like leaders' grunts. And the last, well, the last sounded like a young one. It was higher pitch and chirped in happy segments, just like his multiple sets of litter mates. Then, the door started jiggling. The boy bit down his yelp, crouching low in preparation of a pounce. He tugged again, but there was still no change to his body. How had the two legs done that? No time to think about it now. He needed to prepare. He was smaller than the other two legs. He was weaker and his teeth and nails were pitiful in this form. He would have to try to scare them and then run off. That was the only way he could think to get out. As soon as the closed opening finally opened, the boy jumped forward, snapping his teeth and growling at the two legs standing in his way. The one in the doorway did not seem surprised like the boy had hoped. Instead, the tall one all in black held out an arm, catching the boy before he could duck out of this den room. He yelped when the arm wrapped around him and lashed out with his full strength, trying to get the dark one to let him go. He bit into the arm as hard as he could and was pleased when he tasted blood. The dark one was garbling something in the gruff tone that had reminded him of Leader. Then, the higher-pitched voice garbled back. In an instant, the boy's feet were scooped off the ground as the dark one picked him up. He thrashed around more only to be set on the nest. The dark one backed up and garbled more before sighing when the high voice answered. Then his eyes glowed red and his hair floated up. The boy remembered this one. It was the alpha of the two legs. He whimpered at the sight and scurried back to the end of the nest, near the wall. The alpha didn't lower his gaze, though, commanding respect as his fur stood on end. He must be really angry. Would he hurt the boy if things didn't go his way, or would he take mercy on the pup? Could they tell he was a young one when he was in this form? Not wanting to chance being killed, the boy once more submitted, lowering his gaze and bowing his head as he presented his softer belly to the dark alpha. The high-pitched voice seemed much happier as it chirped again. The dark alpha huffed and then moved forward towards the boy. The child could only shrink back, rolling to present his back just in case the dark alpha decided to attack anyway. Instead, gentle hands caressed his face and hair as more unintelligible sounds escaped the man's throat, this time much softer. The boy didn't lean into them despite craving the warmth. He didn't know the two-leg ways. They may be different from wolves and cats. Though, submitting had worked just fine. However, if he acted wrong, the dark alpha may get mad again. He may nip at the boy or actually hurt him. So the boy stayed still, chancing a glance up to observe the dark alpha's face. The expression was one of calm and the boy relaxed ever so slightly, sitting back a little but making sure to keep his head bowed. How he wished he had mobile ears in this form to show his obedience. Another tug proved fruitless once again. The dark alpha's arms trailed from the boy's face to his shoulders, stopping when the boy tensed up again and only continuing when he relaxed back. From his shoulders, the man moved his hands to the arm that was wrapped up tight. The boy, curious as to what it was, allowed the dark alpha to inspect the area. The alpha's hands moved around the white fabric, which, to the boy's interest, had turned the color of blood around the area where the vine was still connected and hanging from. Eventually, the dark alpha seemed to find something and started to pull the wrapping away. At first, it was fine, until the wrapping came to his skin. It wasn't actually sticky, like he had thought, but it prickled at his skin as it was taken away. It left white and red marks along the area, similar to the time when he had touched the bad leaves and his skin had itched. He went to scratch despite not feeling the annoying sensation, just from the habit. The dark alpha only batted his other hand away with a gruff gurgle of noise. Once all the wrapping was gone, the boy noticed something that he really shouldn't have seen. The vine was in his arm. It protruded inward to where the boy could even make out the raised shape under the thin layer of skin. It was just like the time that prickly animal had shot quills into his leg when he had disturbed its nest. He could transform into that animal too, though he didn't like to, as changing back into anything else was supremely uncomfortable as the quills drew back. That time had made the boy dizzy, and this time was no exception. As the boy stared down, he suddenly started to see black dots spot in his vision. The next thing he knew, the dark alpha was crouched over him, tapping at his face with his brows knitted together. The boy was taken to a secure hero hospital in Tokyo. His room was on the inside of the hospital so he couldn't jump out any windows should he grow scared. It had been set up with cameras and the boy was put on a quirk suppressant drip along with a sedative. The doctors ran a few blood tests and checked his overall health. They also scanned his brain while the kid was out cold. Nizu had requested the last test, personally. After that, the nurses had done their best to give the boy a sponge bath and then had put underwear on the child before tucking him into the bed. The door was locked. Only certain nurses and doctors who were debriefed on the situation were allowed entry to the room. Past that, someone monitored the cameras the entire time. After 12 hours, the boy was taken off the sedative and left to wake up. Nizu suggested that they observe the boy's reaction to the environment before introducing him to new strangers. So they sat and waited for the kid to wake up. What should have taken an hour, only took 30 minutes as the boy slowly came to. His reaction had been much calmer than Aizawa had expected, as well. The boy was more curious than scared at first. He observed the room and the four. He even took down the four bag, apparently thinking it held water. The nurse had flinched at that. It's not dangerous to drink, but the taste is awful. I've had one thrown at me and explode, it made my nose sting, she said in explanation. The boy's reaction to the not water seemed to fit that description. His next act was to take off the underpants. This did not surprise Aizawa in the slightest, as the boy was not used to wearing any clothing. After a while of pushing at the door, the kid moved on to the purple chair in the corner. He scratched and kneaded at it for a while before he seemed to freeze and then tense. He quickly scurried off the chair and paced the room over and over, looking around warily and batting at his chest, but past that, he didn't do much else. Let's go visit him, Nizu said cheerfully as he stood. Aizawa sighed, following his lead, only to have the principal climb up his leg and bury himself in his scarf. Onward, Aizawa-san, the principal said happily, either not noticing or ignoring Aizawa's annoyed huff. Tell me again why I have to be the one to greet him, Aizawa drawled as they walked to the room. Because he seems to respect you. I scared him. Yes, but he also submitted respectfully. Everyone will scare him at this point, so we should get someone who can at least control him without having him lash out to bite. Aizawa grunted in response. Since he is awake, I will be leaving him to you, the nurse said as she unlocked the door. Aizawa stepped forward and opened the door, only to be pounced at immediately. It was a feint, though, as the boy tried to dart out into the hall. Aizawa quickly stuck out an arm, wrapping it across the wild child's chest to prevent the escape. The kid went nuts, ultimately sinking his teeth in. What were you saying about having him not bite? Aizawa growled as his right arm throbbed. He was pretty sure that the boy had broken skin, too. Nizu chuckled low. You simply need to show him who is in charge. Aizawa picked the kid up and moved him into the room, only to then plop him on the bed unceremoniously. How do I show him who's in charge? Using your quirk did the job, last time, Nizu piped up. Aizawa sighed as he observed the growling and cowering boy on the bed. He closed his eyes for a second and then activated his quirk as he opened them. The boy's demeanor immediately changed as he rolled onto his back in SBMSN. It worked. Nizu cheered happily. This is unnerving, Aizawa grumbled. He stalked towards the boy, who immediately turned back, hiding himself in a condensed ball. Aizawa ran a gentle hand through his hair and cupped his face to bring the boy out a bit. He seemed to enjoy the gentle touch, but his wary eyes never left some part of Aizawa's body. Very briefly, the boy glanced up and made eye contact before looking back down. Aizawa slowly and gently moved his hands down towards the boy's arm. Blood was seeping through the tape bandage, probably from when he pulled at the fore when he first woke up. The boy was very still as Aizawa unwrapped his arm, only to go pale when he spotted the needle. Aizawa recognized the signs quickly and caught the kid as he tilted sideways in a feint. I'm going to say that he probably isn't fond of needles, Aizawa commented. Nizu merely hummed. Aizawa took the needle out of the kid's arm first before he tapped him awake. Groggy eyes opened. And the boy's face morphed into confusion, followed closely by fear. He scrambled to sit up, but Aizawa laid a hand on his chest gently but firmly. If he didn't stay down, he'd just faint again. Stay, Aizawa commanded. The boy whimpered and shook his head side to side. Little hands came up to push at Aizawa's hand, though he did not use his nails. Another whimper and then the kid howled out. Aizawa had seen the kid do this when he was in danger in the woods. It wasn't quite wolf-like, instead mixing a cat's yowl as well. It was uniquely the child's cry, and the animals knew to find him when they heard it. The boy howled again, louder, and Aizawa removed his hand, brushing the tears away from the kid's cheeks. I think I shall make my appearance now, Nizu squeaked as he ran down Aizawa's back. The small principal pulled himself up onto the bed and crawled to sit near the boy so that he could be seen. As soon as the boy saw Nizu, he calmed, tilting his head in confusion as he observed the intelligent rodent. The boy batted at his chest again as his brows furrowed together. In just a few seconds, a green raccoon dog took the child's place. Oh, a tanuki. I don't think I've ever been compared to one of those before, Nizu said happily. Very clever, little Midoriya. The tanuki opened its mouth and seemed to scent the air for a second before making a high whining sound. Nizu chuckled and held out a paw calmly, showing the boy he was no threat. The kid looked down at the paw and tilted its head before the creature hopped off the bed and changed again, this time, into a bear. The bear made no threatening moves as it walked forward, though Aizawa couldn't stop the tensing of his muscles. He could deal with humans just fine. But this was a FING bear, and if that didn't make your instincts scream at you, then something was wrong. The bear was clearly not full grown, barely reaching Aizawa's stomach as it came up to sniff at Nizu again. Oh, a polar bear. I am impressed you know that one. Nizu said, ears twitching. At the twitch, the bear jumped up and down a bit, before walking in a circle a few times. Polar bear? How can you tell? Aren't they extinct? The shape of his skull and the greater size compared to his age. Nizu said immediately, putting on his lecturing voice. And yes, they went extinct shortly after the rise of quirks. The bear before them tilted its head again, a clear question. Then, it leaped, as if to get on the bed. Aizawa moved away quickly, but it wasn't needed as the boy turned into a small ferret mid-leap. The creature chittered as if laughing at Aizawa's reaction before it quelled itself, ears folding back once more as the boy remembered where he was. Relatively quickly, the boy turned into his wolf form, taking up more room but not any more than his human form did. Midoriya slowly walked up to Aizawa, the dipping of the bed making him stumble a little as he shimmied forward. Lean down, Aizawa. Nizu directed. Aizawa gave the principal a curious and bewildered look before finally resigning himself to his fate as he leaned down to be nearly face level with the wild animal. The only reason he wasn't panicking was because he knew that the creature in front of him was just a child whose quirk he could erase. However, to have a dog with 3-inch canine teeth right in front of your face was not a position that Aizawa would like to find himself in again. He was a cat person for a reason. The boy nuzzled at Aizawa's chin before liking the area once. Aizawa drew back in slight surprise, causing the kid to wilt down once more. Aizawa sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose before leaning down again, this time allowing the kid to back away first once he had felt he, properly, greeted Aizawa. It was not lost on the man that he was currently seen as the one in charge here. He only hoped that wouldn't bite him in the butt. He felt much more at ease once the human alpha accepted his proper show of respect. It was even more calming to have the other one around as well. The other one smelled of human, but also animal. The boy couldn't pinpoint which animal, though he thinks his bear form was pleasing to the not really human but not really animal thing. It was odd. Usually when he saw an animal with fur, he could change into it the moment he saw it. Maybe it was because this one was wearing that material? Or, maybe this one was like the possums who were just different enough that the boy couldn't copy. The boy had tried communicating with the thing but it didn't seem to understand much. It didn't even seem to notice its own tells, twitching its ear in pleasure but then using the human language instead of acknowledging the boy's excitement and questions. Maybe it was stupid? Not that it mattered. Lots of animals were stupid. So long as they could survive, all was fine. This one definitely seemed capable of survival, even amongst the humans. The boy had to wonder if the Dark Alpha was one of the reasons it had been capable of living so long. That would certainly make sense. Perhaps, the Dark Alpha would protect him too. The Dark Alpha didn't seem fond of the bear or wolf forms he took, his scent giving off traces of unease, so the boy shifted into the two-leg form once he had paid his dues. The white one seemed surprised by his willingness to be like the two legs, which only furthered the boy's guess that thing was an idiot. Most creatures like to be around creatures that looked like them. It was only natural to change yourself to fit in. It had saved his life plenty of times before. Even the white one had attempted blending in. He was wearing the constricting fabric despite having fur and he walked on two legs. Didn't he see that the boy was just doing the same thing, only better because he could actually change properly? The white one and the Dark Alpha seemed to speak back and forth for a bit before the Dark Alpha turned his way with a sigh. He touched a hand to his chest. And made a sound, and then touched his hand to the boy's chest and made a different sound. He repeated the action a few times before looking at the boy expectantly. The boy lifted a hand and carefully placed it against the Dark Alpha's chest. The man seemed to straighten up at that and the white one grinned. That must be good. Then, the boy moved his hand back to his own chest. The Dark Alpha's lips quirked a little and his eyes softened. That was good. He was doing good. The Dark Alpha made the same motion again, saying the same sounds. The boy copied the motion but stayed quiet. Over and over the two went back and forth until the boy became frustrated. When it was his turn, the boy grumbled low when he patted the Dark Alpha and then himself. Once more, both of the other creatures in the room seemed to grow excited. The boy, in turn, also got excited at the happiness radiating from the two. Did they want him to say something too? The Dark Alpha repeated the gesture and the noise. Then, the boy repeated the gesture. He grunted low in his throat when his hand touched the Dark Alpha's chest, and then he chirped a bit when he touched his own. This seemed to only make the White One even more pleased as he chittered something to the Dark Alpha. The motion repeated, and this time, the boy made different sounds. When he motioned at the Dark One, he yipped. When he motioned at himself, he cooed. This deflated the two in front of him, and the boy backed away immediately. Had he done something wrong? Were those sounds rude to these creatures? Was the Alpha angry? Instead of the quick, scolding bite, the Dark One only got the boy's attention and repeated the motion. He said the sounds really slowly that time, and the boy suddenly understood. They didn't want just any sounds. They wanted those sounds. He needed the man to repeat them again, then, so he could listen better. The boy slowly reached out for the man's hand and grabbed it, pushing it onto the man's chest and tilting his head in question. Shota. The man said. Sure, the boy repeated the first sound. Before tapping the Alpha's chest once more to have him repeat. Sho. Ta. Shota. Sho. Oh. Ta. The boy repeated. The Alpha actually smiled and nodded his head before repeating it again. Shota. Shota. The boy mimicked. The man moved his hand back to the boy and made new sounds. Izuku. Zu. Ku. Izugu. Ku. The man repeated the last sound. Gu. Ku. The boy tried a range of sounds, trying to find the one that the man had used before, finally figuring out how to maneuver his tongue out of the way to make the sharper sound. Ku. He finally said. By that point, he had forgotten the first part, though. The boy tapped his own chest and looked at the Alpha with a tilted head once more. Izuku. Zu. Ku. Izuku. The man said. Izuku, the boy repeated. Izuku. The man said again. The boy tried to match the faster pace. Izuku. The man garbled something and the White One garbled back. Gudu. Nuff. The boy repeated, picking up on some of the sounds. He knew he wasn't doing it quite right, but the two seemed incredibly happy with his effort. The man patted to himself and raised his brows slightly as he looked at the boy. The boy only waited for the man to speak. Eventually, the man stiffly tilted his head to the side and tapped his chest again. Oh, he wanted the boy to speak the sound. Shota. The boy said, stumbling through the sounds. Next, the man's hand was on his own chest, and once more, only the man's brows raised a bit. That must be their way of asking a question. Izuku. The boy repeated. Then, the man moved his hand somewhere new, to the White One's chest. Nizu. The Alpha spoke. Zu. Ku. The boy said. He knew that sound. The Dark Alpha grasped the boy's arm and placed his hand on the White One's chest, still seeming happy. Neizu. He said. Nei, the boy copied. That sound wasn't nearly as hard as some of the others had been. Neizu. Nizu. Nezu. The boy repeated, feeling pleased with the smiles he had made the two show. The man made more sounds and the boy tried his best to copy. Gudu. Then, the Dark Alpha stood. He was slow so as not to scare the boy. The White One followed, jumping up onto the Dark Alpha's back and sitting on his shoulder. The Dark Alpha took out a shiny something from his pocket and put it inside the hole of the second closed opening. With a click, the closed opening opened. The boy perked up but didn't move. That may be the leader's den. He wouldn't be allowed in the leader's den. Izuku. The man said. The boy perked up at the sound of the new word, placing a hand to his chest immediately and copying. Izuku. Izuku. The man said again. The boy sighed, copying once more in frustration. It was really starting to get boring to say these things over and over. A loud clap rang through the air, jolting the boy as he looked up at the Dark Alpha quickly. He made a funny motion with his hand that the boy was pretty sure meant follow. Izuku. The man said again. Come. He said, motioning with his hand. That was a new sound. Cuh. The boy mimicked. The White One chittered something too quiet for the boy to pick up on. The Dark Alpha sighed, grabbing at his nose before he made eye contact with the boy once more. Izuku, come. He said, making the motion again. The boy stood, and hesitantly took a step forward, unsure if that was really what the signal meant. The man gave his super soft smile and nodded. So the boy was doing the right thing. Izuku, come. The boy chirped, pausing much longer than the man had between each word. Good. Gudu. The boy mimicked. The inside of the new den was very strange. It was also white, but it had objects that the boy had never seen before. One object looked like a white and hard version of the purple thing in the other den. He went up to it and ran a hand across, only to pull it back. This object was hard and cold and he didn't like it. He preferred the warm, soft one. The other two objects seemed to be made of the same material. One looked like a large nest and the other, some weird small tree with a bowl at the top. The boy tried to go back to the other room, but the dark alpha huffed another, "Izuku, come." The boy was pretty sure that meant that he needed to follow the man. The white one hopped off the dark alpha's shoulders and onto the tallest object. It came up to his chest and had a bowl shape like one of the strange rocks he had found. The white one pointed and said, "Sink." "E." The boy said, mimicking the major sound that he knew. "SSSSEN. Ku." The white one said slowly. "SSS," the boy said, looking around the den as his shoulders tensed. He didn't see any snakes in the area, though. "SSS," the boy dropped to the ground and crawled about a bit, making sure he looked in every corner. "No," the white one said. "No," the boy mimicked. Another clap, this one quieter, had the boy looking up. The white one pointed at the cold, tall bowl. "Sink." "Seek," the boy said. "Gudu," he said, before the other man could say anything else. It seemed, whenever that sound was used, that ended the copying. The boy was done with the copying. The boy went to leave the room again, finding it much too cold for his liking when the dark one spoke again. "Izuku." The boy slumped, turning around slowly as he looked at the taller man. "Izuku." He copied sadly. "How long would this game go on for?" Come. The boy muttered, walking forward at the same time. Good. He said. At this moment, he really could have used a tail to show what he was feeling. A cat tail. They were more expressive. And maybe the ears. His skin itched at the thought as his mind unconsciously pulled at his chest. He wasn't actually trying to change though, he just wished to have some help with these 2 legs. So, it was a surprise when he could suddenly hear much better than this form usually did. It was even more surprising when he felt something brush against his lower back. The boy nearly jumped a foot in the air at the sensation, turning quickly and hissing, only to realize that nothing was there. It was then that he realized it was a tail. His tail, that had touched him. He hadn't known he could do that. The boy reached up and touched at his ears, noting that they were now closer to the top of his head and very furry. He could tell they were cat ears from how they picked up the sounds around him. Cats hear differently than wolves. Cats are more in tune with smaller, quicker sounds. The heartbeat of a rat. The soft pitter-patter of a small paws and claws against the forest floor. The faraway tweet of a bird, all the way at the top of a tree. Wolves, on the other hand, were more in tune with the deeper level. The breath instead of the heartbeat. The grunting noises or hoof beats of prey. The creak of the trees when the wind pushed against them too hard. Cat ears were much more useful when dealing with 2 legs. "Izuku?" The tone of the word was different that time, making the kid perk up. The dark alpha was looking at him in uncertainty. The white one chittered something much too fast for him to pick up and the dark alpha chatted back just as quickly before turning back to look at the boy. Then, he shrugged and turned around, twisting one of the shiny branches sticking out of the den wall. It wasn't a branch, though. It couldn't be a branch. When branches were twisted, they broke. And this branch, this one didn't break. Instead, it created water. The boy's eyes went wide as he watched the water cascade from the branch that had the hole. It was all tunneling into the super large bowl that the boy had originally mistaken as a nest. This alpha 2-leg was making a pond. The boy ran over quickly, running his hands under the streaming water and bending his head forward to drink. He was still so thirsty, and his throat still tingled from the not water in the pouch. This, however, was water and it soothed the ache in his throat easily. His ears twitched in aggravation as the water fell into the sensitive fur and the boy shook his head once, dispelling the ears to go back to what was normal for this form. His tail remained, just in case the 2 legs needed help understanding something. "Izuku," the dark alpha said, placing a hand on his shoulder to draw him back. The boy licked at his lips while he gazed at the man who was now pointing. "Bath," he said. "Izuku." "Bash," the boy said, turning back to the falling water so that he could drink more. All of a sudden, he was being lifted by the dark alpha. The hands were gentle, unlike the 2 legs in white, but the boy still froze and whimpered, squirming in the grasp a little at the unease of his movement being controlled. His tail fur puffed up wide as it stiffened in fear. The dark alpha placed him in the not nest but what was probably a small pond, where the water was slowly rising. The boy, who hadn't been expecting to get wet, growled low and hissed when his tail fell into the water. The tail was gone very quickly just as the ears had gone. Despite being more comfortable without the extra appendage, the boy still did not want to be wet right now. He had to be in his 2-leg form and his 2-leg form got cold too easy for it to be wet. He tried to scramble out of the tug, only for the white one to tsk, his whiskers twitching in a way that meant, no. The boy growled at the white one. He was the prey in this situation. He could not tell the boy what to do. The boy could easily become a wolf or a bear or any other predator and put that pretend two-leg in its place. The only reason he had listened to it thus far was because the alpha two-leg seemed to like it. The boy was willing to take his chance with the alpha. Most of the time, they didn't mind much when lower creatures were taught their place, even if it was a pup who did it. However, the dark alpha came into his field of vision quickly, his gaze stern as he held the boy's forearms. "Bath," he said. The boy flared his nose twice at the white one before turning to look back at the dark alpha. "Izuku. Bash," he said. The dark alpha nodded, and pushed the boy back, causing him to fall from his crouched position onto his bottom, getting even more wet. The water level was rising in the pond as more water left the hole in the knot branch. The boy whimpered, looking up at the alpha with wide eyes. He made ears appear once more and bent them back flat against his head. Why was the man making him get wet? Was this a punishment? Did he want the boy to be cold? What had he done wrong? "Izuku," he said, tapping his chest to try and make the man happy once more. It didn't work. Instead, the man simply scooped up some water in his hands and dumped it over the boy's chest. The water, the boy realized, was warm, as if the sun had been shining on it all day. It actually felt really nice, and soon, he simply accepted the position he was in as the pond filled up more and more. After the pond got past his waist, the dark alpha turned the shiny knot branch and the water stopped falling from the knot branch with the hole. The boy moved over to it as the white one handed the alpha a white rock and a small version of the thing that had covered him in the nest. Still mad at the white one, the boy growled low in his throat and nipped at him, warning him to back off. The alpha's brows furrowed and he frowned deeply at that, and the boy backed down, ears flattening again. Was he not supposed to do that? But the white one should be prey to the two-leg. There should be no reason for the boy to not have the right to scold him. The boy brushed it off when the alpha turned back to his rock and pelt leaf thing. He turned back to the branch with the hole, sticking his fingers into the area, trying to feel for where the water could be hiding. Except, there was no water in it at all. The boy groped around a bit more, but nothing was there. While he was distracted, the alpha two-leg had started rubbing the smaller nest bedding? That would probably be a good enough explanation, down his back. The motion sent shivers down the boy's body, but he didn't mind much. The boy reached up to tug at the other branch, the one that moved, while his face was under the branch with the hole. That was a mistake. Water suddenly rushed at the boy, soaking his face and causing the water to fill his mouth and nose and sensitive ears, choking him and making him GG. When he pulled away, the edge of the knot branch with a hole caught on his cheek and scratched it. The boy whimpered pitifully through his coughs and wheezes as he tried to expel the water that had made it into his lungs. His ears twitched uncontrollably as the fur on the outside was overstimulated and the water that made it in his ear made sounds waver and distort. As soon as he could breathe again, the boy wanted out, standing halfway and trying to slide over the edge of the pond, still off balance from the water in his ears. The dark alpha was preventing him to, though. The man had turned off the water quickly and had been gently rubbing circles into his back while he spluttered, but now, was preventing him from going to safety. This one was so confusing. Was he kind or cruel? The boy couldn't tell. The child whined, high-pitched and long as he struggled with the dark alpha. Eventually, he was forced to sit back in the water and let the man do whatever it was he wanted. The man was pretty much soaked by now, his hair dripping with water just as much as the boy was. But he didn't seem to mind much. He, instead, simply rubbed the rock into the tiny nest bedding and then rubbed at the boy with the nest bedding. After a while, the boy grabbed the nest bedding and rubbed at himself, curious as to why the man was doing so. Was it a game? Was it supposed to be fun? He didn't find it very fun, himself, maybe? The boy reached out, rubbing the nest bedding down the man's chest, soaking the funny material that the man wore as he did so. The boy scrunched up his face when it seemed to do no good and instead moved to rub at the naked parts of the man, namely, his hands and face. The alpha seemed to be okay with it for a while before he grabbed the rag back and started back on the boy. It was then that the kid realized that he was being groomed. This must be how two legs groom one another. He supposed that made sense since their tongues weren't all that long, but it was still a funny concept to him. They had to have a special den where they could groom? Didn't that get inconvenient when they were playing outside? How did they share scent this way? How did they pick out any bugs that showed up in their fur? The boy huffed in amusement, his ears twitching slightly as he did so. He'd have to teach the two legs how grooming was supposed to be, he supposed. The boy twisted away from the nest bedding and sat up straight, holding out his hands so that he could still the alpha. He was unsure how to actually go about this without making the alpha mad, but he was going to try. The man was grooming him wrong. So, the boy demonstrated, just how the alpha had demonstrated his funny sounds. The boy licked at his hand and wrist before bringing it back and over his head, then repeated. After a bit of showing he stopped, and looked at the Dark Alpha as seriously as he could manage to try and get the point across. No, the man said, we take baths. Bash. The boy mimicked placatingly, keeping his tone much more gentle than the hyper air he was giving off earlier. Then, the boy showed the man again and once more looked at him pointedly. No, the man said again, sticking his hand in the water and splashing a little. We take baths. No, the boy mimicked. Bash. Then he liked it himself once more. Bath must be the wood for grooming. That much was becoming clear. However, the man was grooming wrong and the boy was determined to show him how to do it properly. So the child grasped the Alpha's hand, and brought it to his face. Then, he guided the man's hand over his head to show him the motion. The Alpha huffed back at him, amusement and irritation shining in his eyes at the boy's antics. No, he said again. No, the boy mimicked. Once more, the child was gently pushed back into the water. This time, the Dark Alpha didn't stop there. The man ran a hand through the boy's only fur in this body at the top of his head. Then, the man pushed back gently, guiding the boy to lie down in the pond. The boy, of course, fought against this. Why on earth would he want to get even more wet? Especially the fur. The fur in Ty's form took forever to dry. He couldn't just shake it out like the others. He didn't want to swim right now, either. He was trying to teach the man the right way to groom. Unless the man was more than irritated and was actually angry. He had yet to see Two Legs angry, so maybe he was just reading him wrong. He'd never been put in water when someone was angry, but Two Legs were strange. The boy struggled more, whimpering and yelping despite having been allowed to sit up as soon as he first struggled. The boy quickly found himself cowering in the back corner of the pond, shivering lightly as his body scooted further up the edge, leaving him dripping wet and cold. Shoo, the Dark Alpha said. It's okay. It's okay. I'm sorry. Shoo, the boy mimicked, looking up at the man slowly. Shota. The man nodded, pointing to himself. I'm Shota. The boy copied, pointing to his own chest. I'm Shota. The man shook his head and pointed at the boy. Izuku. Then he pointed at himself. Shota. Then he pointed to the white one, who had been sitting on the bole tree for a while. Nizu. Something seemed to click into place in the boy's mind. He was named. It was such an odd thing to think. The only ones who were ever named were those in charge and he was just a pup. He couldn't be named. He wasn't leader. Not only had he been named, but no one seemed to share the name either. That was nearly unheard of. There may be only one leader, which he assumed was Shota in the two-leg talk, but there were multiples of everything else. 2 alphas. 2 to 4 betas. A multitude of other ranks, each level growing bigger until you reached pup. In fact, the only singular one was Omega? Then again, there were only 3 people here. Izuku may just be the word for beta. There might be a bunch of Izukus. Unless Izuku meant pup. In that case, what did Nizu mean? It wasn't like the human-animal thing fit into the relationships that Izuku had managed to piece together. He was prey, but not. He was respected, but too small to be strong. He seemed to have a place equal to or greater than Izuku, even though his scent said he was full-grown and definitely not kin to the alpha. Maybe Nizu was the name of the animal and he wasn't even a part of the two-leg pack at all. That would make sense. Oh, this language was starting to hurt his head. The boy scrunched up his nose in disgust, shaking his head and flinging water. The alpha, Shota, backed up at the motion, frowning for a split second before he sighed again when the white one, no, the Nizu, chittered again. Shota rubbed at his temples and grumbled something back before turning back to Izuku with determination in his eyes. Izuku blinked at the man. Bath. He said again, gently grabbing hold of Izuku's arm and directing him to sit in the slowly cooling water. The man splashed his hand in the water and looked at the boy in earnest. Water. He spoke. Water. Izuku copied. The man splashed again and then cupped his hands and brought the water to Izuku's eye level. Water. He said. Water. The boy copied once more, now looking down at the liquid surrounding him. That must be the word for it. He splashed. Water. Good. Good. Shota drew the boy's attention once more, pointing to Izuku's head and then down at the water. Bath. Bash. Izuku huffed when he said the word wrong again but hoped Shota understood he was trying. Then the man picked up the nest bedding once more and wiped it down Izuku's chest once more. Washington. Wash. The boy said, taking the rag and dragging it down Shota's chest. Bash. Then, the boy liked his arm and showed Shota how he was supposed to groom. The Nizu laughed and Shota grinned a bit. Good. The boy said happily at the reaction. They must be getting it. The boy pointed at the nest bedding and tilted his head. Wash. Good. Wash Izuku. Wash. Izuku. The boy took the article and dragged it down his chest again. Shota pointed to his fur on his head and a new sound came out. Hair. Hey-er. The boy said. Hair. Hey-er. Shota nodded. Took the nest bedding back and dipped it in the water. Wash Izuku's hair, he said as he brought the rag up and squeezed it over the boy's head, making water cascade from above. The boy shook his head again, ears twitching angrily of their own accord, when Shota was done, looking up at the man with a pout. Wash Shota hair, he said, trying to nab the material out of the man's hand. Shota pulled back, though, not letting the boy take it. No. The boy huffed, ears flicking more droplets towards the man in irritation. He covered his ears when Shota went to wash Izuku hair again. Water still touched the sensitive area, though, and Izuku shivered in discomfort. He whined high in his throat when Shota went to do it again. This seemed to be the last time, luckily, as Shota and Nizu chatted more and Shota slumped forward, looking really tired. The two kept repeating a word and Izuku yipped to gain their attention. Soap, he said, puffing out his chest proudly. He did that one all by himself. The Nizu grinned at him and nodded. No soap. No towels, came the high-pitched reply. Izuku knit his brows together and tilted his head to the side. No soap. No towels. He tried to copy. Shota spoke again before sighing once more. Shota must do that a lot. All of a sudden, Shota stood up and left the den, the opening closed behind him. Izuku whined as he tried to stand up quickly to follow. Don't leave, he howled. The boy scrambled over the edge of the bath, slipping on his way and falling onto the wet and cold floor. The boy whined again, sitting up and howling once more. Come back. The Nizu slipped from the sink and walked up to Izuku calmly, holding out a hand for Izuku to see before rubbing it through his hair. It was comforting and Izuku leaned into it, his body shaking as the wet made him even more cold in this already cold room. The boy whimpered again, moving over to the closed opening and scratching at it. Soon, he started banging on it and pushing it, but the closed opening wouldn't move. The boy cried out again before backing off with a last whimper and changing into something that would at least be a little warmer. The bear form didn't mind water as much as some of the other animals. It was always able to handle the cold a little better than the wolf or cat forms too. However, it made him a little sick if he kept it too long. The bear form, unlike the wolf and cat form, wasn't one that he took often and thus, it made him feel icky, just like the porcupine form did. He huffed and continued to keen near the door in this form, even as the Nizu tried to soothe him. He shook his head when Nizu pet it and batted the other animal away, keening even louder. He didn't want the Nizu. He wanted Shota. Nizu couldn't protect him, he was barely more than prey. Shota could keep him safe though. He was alpha. It took all of 4 minutes to get the towels and clothes for himself and the kid from down the hall. Yet, when Aizawa walked back into the bathroom, the kid, now a bear, was whining high in his throat while he sat next to the door. I think he missed you, Nizu said calmly as he stood near the boy. He cried the same way he did when the she-wolf died. The kid was still whining in his throat but had attempted to sit up, his claws scraping on the tile as he pushed himself up. Izuku transformed back into a human as soon as he sat up. The kid was shaking uncontrollably and his eyes were red as tears and snot ran down his face. Aizawa grimaced and knelt down to the kid, wrapping him in a towel and tucking him into his chest. You didn't think to comfort him or something? Aizawa snapped. I did. Unfortunately, Midoriyukuin didn't want me. He seems to like you more, now. Aizawa frowned as the still hiccuping boy curled his face up towards his chin, liking at it a little as the boy attempted to greet Aizawa, properly, in wolf terms, anyway. Aizawa carried Izuku into the other room, standing him up on the floor near the chair. The kid was still shaking like a leaf and Aizawa worked quickly to dry him off. They really should have thought through the bath more, but it had been a split-second decision. The kid had just smelled awful, and the bath would give Nizu the opportunity to explore his capabilities in learning language. Apparently, they were looking at a miracle as the boy picked up the words and concepts much quicker than, well, anyone or anything should have. Even Nizu, when he was still young, had taken much longer to be cognoscenti enough to learn his first language. Of course, Nizu was a quirked animal. This kid was a human raised by animals. It may be different. When Aizawa went to dry the kid's hair, he pulled back, eyeing the towel as if it had offended him. Wash, the boy clicked his tongue. Bath. Then, the boy liked his hand and motioned in his hair again. No, Aizawa said softly. You are human. Humans do it differently. Bath. The boy said again, stepping towards Aizawa and nuzzling his head under the man's chin. Izuku. Wash. Grab me that comb, Nizu. Aizawa said. He would absolutely not do as the boy was asking. He wasn't a cat. He did not lick people clean, especially not children. He did not need to lose his license, thank you very much. Once handed the comb, Aizawa slowly started detangling the head of curls that the boy sported. It was ridiculously long. His curls fell down to his mid-back and had pretty much knotted into one large mass. There was no way this pathetic comb would ever make a dent, but Aizawa would at least run it through the top of the kid's head, giving him the sense of being groomed in a familiar way. As he combed with one hand, he attempted to towel dry the rest of the child's knotted mass of hair with his other. After a bit, the boy started making a soft trilling sound that soon settled into a purr. Think he can just do that naturally, or do you think he's actively using his quirk to change his vocal cords so he can make the sound? Aizawa asked Nizu. The principal, who had been writing hastily in a notebook, looked up at being addressed. I'm not sure. You can always find out. The rodent said, eyes gleaming in curiosity. Aizawa sighed. Maybe when he isn't terrified of my quirk. He said. No reason for him to think I'm mad when I'm not. Nizu's face dropped to a frown for a split second before he brought it back up into a smile. Of course. He chirped happily, turning back to the notebook. The kid is a child first and an experiment last, Nizu. Aizawa warned. I know. The principal said. I didn't push the matter, did I? Aizawa rolled his eyes at his boss before pushing the kid back a step. Aizawa stripped himself of his wet shirt and then showed it to the boy. Shirt. He said. Shota. The boy said back. Aizawa shook his head, no. Shirt. He showed the clothing to the boy again, hoping he would pick this one up quickly. Shirt. The boy said, pointing to the black article in his hands. Good. He said, before Aizawa had the chance. Aizawa turned away to grab the fresh shirt when the boy's small hands were suddenly on his chest, poking at it. He batted the boy away but was met with a huff of indignation. Finally grasping the dry piece, Aizawa turned back to be met with a pout. The kid shook off the towel that had been wrapping him and dragged his hands down his chest, observing it intently before turning back to Aizawa and placing his hands in the same place. Tiny fingers laced in his chest hair and tugged, causing Aizawa to wince and bat the kid away again. No, he said sharply. The boy's eyes widened for a moment before he reached out again. Aizawa tapped his hand, not enough to hurt but enough to shock the child out of his curiosity. No, he said again using the same sharp tone. No, the boy echoed back. He bowed his head, looking up at Aizawa through his lashes as he stepped forward, nuzzling into his chin once more, asking for forgiveness. Aizawa sighed, patting the boy on his head before pushing him back a step. He raised the new shirt up and was about to say the word again when he stopped. The boy was looking down at his chest in confusion before looking back up at Aizawa's. His fingers twitched but he didn't move his hands in that direction. The kid patted his chest. Izuku. Then, he pointed. Shota. Then, the boy brought his hands together, as if praying. Izuku looked up, then, his eyes pleading for Aizawa to understand. But he didn't. The boy touched his own chest again and very, very hesitantly reached out a hand. Aizawa relented, allowing the kid to make contact. The small fingers curled much more gently in his chest hair this time. Shota. The kid said. Hair. Then he pulled back to himself. Izuku. No hair. Then, the boy broke down in tears once more, falling to sit on the floor with his head between his knees. What the hell just happened? Aizawa asked, bewildered, as the kid whimpered in front of him. I'm not exactly sure. Nizu replied, scribbling more notes. Aren't you a genius? The rat hummed in displeasure. My best guess is that the boy made a connection that he wasn't fond of. What connection? I may be wrong, but I assume he thinks you may be a different species than he is. To him, he has always been different. He might have guessed he was human but, seeing that you look different, he may think he was wrong. In essence, still an outsider. This is just a guess, of course. Aizawa clicked his tongue. Over chest hair? Children are interesting, aren't they? Nizu replied. With another sigh, this one leaning more towards a groan, Aizawa picked the boy up off the ground and held him close once again. When the boy began to purr for the second time, Aizawa made him move back, picking the shirt back up. Shirt. He said. Shirt. The boy mimicked. Aizawa put it on and pointed again. Shirt. The boy pointed. Shirt. This time, Aizawa added detail, Shota's shirt. Shota's shirt. The boy repeated, pointing at the fabric once more. Then, Aizawa grabbed a t-shirt that would essentially drown the boy. He had figured it may be the easiest to encourage the boy to wear it first. He pointed to it, shirt. The kid's eyebrows cinched together as he looked between the shirt in Aizawa's hands to the one on his body to the wet one on the floor. Making connections, hopefully. Shirt. The boy said, pointing at the item in Aizawa's hands hesitantly. Good. Aizawa praised, patting the kid's head this time. The boy trilled a strange, happy sound from his throat at the touch. Izuku pointed to the wet shirt on the ground and then to the shirt Aizawa was wearing and then to the one in Aizawa's hands and proudly exclaimed, "Shirt." Aizawa grinned and patted him again. The boy followed his hand slightly when he pulled it away. Aizawa pointed at the shirt in his hands. "Izuku's shirt," he said. At that, the boy scrunched up his nose. "No," he said, confusion filtering through his voice. "No, Izuku's shirt." Aizawa grinned. "Yes. Yes." The boy sounded out the new word. "Yes. Izuku's shirt," Aizawa said, pointing again. "Yes." Aizawa presented the garment and gave it to the boy to inspect. The kid rubbed his face into the fabric and then looked up. "Izuku's shirt." "Yes. Yes." The kid finally managed to say correctly. "Izuku's shirt." Aizawa reached out, taking the shirt and scrunching it up to help the boy put it on. The moment he went to place it over the boy's head, though, the kid backed away. "No," the child said, lip protruding in a pout. Aizawa did groan this time. "Izuku, come here." The boy walked forward, only to scurry away again when Aizawa went to place the shirt over his head once more. "No," he said again. After almost 20 more attempts, Aizawa finally resorted to using his more strict tone. The boy immediately came forward and allowed Aizawa to slip the article over his head. The boy's eyes were filled with tears at being reprimanded, nearly crushing Aizawa's heart, but at least the child finally had some fing clothes on. The shirt reached down to Izuku's knees and the neck was so wide that it fell off one shoulder. It was a drab red, clearly having been washed and handed down multiple times, with the word "hero" written in English across the front in bold, black font. It was almost a pity that this was the kid's first article of clothing, but Aizawa hadn't had much other choice. The kid practically drowned in the thing. He was very obviously not pleased by it, either. However, this would cover him and keep him warm. Eventually, the boy would need to learn to wear clothing more regularly, anyway. This was a good start. The kid's eyes were still watering even as a look of sheer petulance had settled on his features. Aizawa huffed at the look of the boy and pulled him forward, allowing the kid to cuddle close once more. The boy shifted a lot more this time, obviously unnerved by being surrounded by the fabric, but eventually, he settled and the purring sound started up again. Once the kid had calmed, Aizawa lifted him up so they could both sit comfortably in the chair. Then, he turned to Nizu, the boy still purring softly in his arms. "Now what? Child services?" Aizawa wasn't exactly fond of the idea, but at least the kid would have a start towards something normal. The principal chuckled low in his throat, his beady eyes moving up to meet with Aizawa's. "That had not been my plan," he said. Aizawa felt dread leak into his stomach. "What is your plan? You seem quite attached to Midoriya-kun already. And he seems quite attached to you." "Nizu," Aizawa said warningly. The boy in his arms shifted at the use of the dangerous tone. "It is just one of many options, of course, but after watching you handle him. I'm 24. I can't take care of a neglected and abused 9-year-old. You have always been good with kids, even in your school days. I have 2 jobs. I would never have the time to watch him. And with him under your care, I can continue monitoring his progress properly. I can aid him in his rehabilitation. When I accepted your teaching position, I did not agree to become a full-time parent. It would truly be a pity to separate the two of you after he has grown so fond in such a short amount of time. I would even dare to say that it would be detrimental to his mental health. Having a kid would be detrimental to my mental health," Aizawa said in exasperation. The boy in his arms had ceased the purring and was now shifting again. "You set me up," Aizawa finally hissed out. At that, the boy tensed in his arms, going completely still as if he, too, were waiting to hear Nizu's reply. "I thought you would be the best suited to the case," Nizu answered. "It was only halfway through that I realized you may be well suited for the boy himself. And your interactions today confirmed my suspicions. You do not have to accept the responsibility if you really don't want to." Aizawa tensed now too, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. "I hate you." Izuku was incredibly bored. He had been stuck in this room for forever, as far as he was concerned. Either Shota or Nizu were always in the room with him, but it was quickly becoming annoying. Izuku wanted to play and hunt and run. It wasn't fair that he was stuck in this tiny white room. Shota and Nizu got to leave every now and then, but when Izuku tried to follow, they stopped him. After the first few times of Nizu trying to act dominant, Izuku had lashed out to show the prey his place. Nizu had been pointing to a bunch of objects in the den and sounding out sounds for Izuku to copy. The boy had played along for a while before huffing loudly and rolling over on the bed, his back to the smaller mammal. He didn't like the white one as much as he liked the dark alpha. Shota never pushed him. Shota would hold him and pet his ears whenever Izuku got too overwhelmed. Shota was like a male mother alpha. He was good. Nizu, on the other hand, was becoming more of a pain with each visit. The small white mammal seemed to think he was above Izuku, his ear and whisker twitches showing amusement and intrigue along with the commands he gave. Izuku hated when the white one would give commands. The animals in the forest only gave commands to protect the pack or clan. They never told others to do useless things like copy sounds or make strange motions. Unlike Shota, who made the sounds into a sort of game, Nizu simply drilled them. One after the other, never taking a break or letting Izuku play with the objects he had discovered the words of. With the mounting frustration aimed at the small mammal, it was only a matter of time before Izuku snapped. It happened on the fourth day, though Izuku had no concept of the passing time without the aid of the sun. Nizu had just drilled the boy in a bunch of new words that Shota would need to review with the child for Izuku to remember. As he went to exit the door, Izuku got up and followed, his curiosity piquing once more. Nizu stopped before opening the door. The small thing looked at Izuku and calmly said, "No." Izuku ignored the command. This time, Nizu held up a paw to stop Izuku in his tracks. "Stay." Izuku growled at the pretend two-leg. How dare he try to control Izuku? Izuku was bigger and stronger. Izuku could take him out with a single bite. He already would have given a proper warning if Shota didn't seem to like the thing. Izuku would never kill Nizu. It wasn't like he needed food. However, he wasn't above nipping at the annoying creature in order to make it listen. Nizu didn't seem frightened by the growl, however. Instead, his ears rotated ever so slightly as his whiskers quivered. A challenge. That was the breaking point for the boy. Almost instantly, Izuku changed into his wolf form, pouncing on Nizu and bringing him down to the ground, at Izuku's mercy. He snarled threateningly in the rodent's face, nipping at the black nose and then taking a small chomp on Nizu's ear. Suddenly, a sharp pain radiated from his neck and cold spread through his veins. Izuku whimpered as he was forcefully switched back into his two-leg form once more. His chest felt empty and cold, just like when the humans by the forest would capture him for the alone nights. His teeth were still clenched onto Nizu's ear as he turned, making him clench down harder than he had originally intended. A small unintentional squeak came from the mammal below him. Izuku let go immediately. He had not intended to bite that sensitive area so hard, but the force change had shocked him. Izuku liked at the wounds a little before backing off shakily. Whatever had happened did not mean that he was permitted to show weakness. He had just dominated the human-like animal, and he needed to stand proudly after the fact. Nizu's withering gaze bore into him, though, as he sat back. A small amount of blood dripped from the small scratch that Izuku had put on Nizu's nose. His ear, on the other hand, was a mess. Izuku winced at the damage he had caused and moved forward once more to try to fix it a bit, but Nizu barked out something in the human language, his tone stern and commanding respect. Izuku flinched at the sound and backed down. Confusion roared through his mind at the juxtaposition of the prey giving a command stern enough that he instinctually listened. Nizu had gotten up slowly, his paws shaking ever so slightly as he left the room, leaving Izuku behind. Nizu hadn't shown up for a much longer time after that, Shota having to stay for long stretches. Izuku didn't mind, but the guilt that he may have actually hurt Shota's friend was palpable. He tried to make it up to the Dark Alpha by being as good as possible, but he wasn't sure if Shota understood his intention. The next time that Nizu had shown up, Shota remained at his side. Izuku wasn't allowed within 5 feet of the creature. This bugged Izuku more than anything. He could sense the tenseness of Shota, almost as if the Alpha thought he would attack again. Didn't the man realize that Izuku had only been showing the creature its place? He wasn't going to actually hurt it. Not while he had food available. To top it off, Nizu didn't even show a sign of the damage Izuku had inflicted anymore. Obviously it hadn't been that bad. The next time that Nizu showed his face, Shota did the same thing. This time, however, Izuku was determined to apologize. Obviously Shota was upset with Izuku over what had happened. The boy simply needed to show the Alpha that he was sorry and could be trusted again. After a while, Izuku seemed to get his chance. Shota was sitting on the nest, which Izuku now knew was called a bed, across from Izuku. Nizu was nestled safely in the scarf around Shota's neck. They were trying to teach Izuku the language again. The boy was careful to be attentive. After Izuku managed to get a word right, Shota pet at his head and Izuku moved forward, crawling into the man's lap and yipping happily. Shota sighed but smiled ever so slightly. It was then that Izuku realized how close to Nizu he was. The boy reached up his hands, brushing them gently over Shota's face before moving them towards Nizu slowly. Both Shota and Nizu froze. Izuku's hands made contact with Nizu's silky face fur and he brushed his hand back slowly, gently. The two relaxed when Izuku made no move to harm. Izuku good? The boy asked, ping his head to the side as he peered at Shota. Izuku good? Nizu no hurt? Nizu chittered something excitedly, popping out of the scarf around Shota's neck. The boy picked up on some of what was said, but honestly, the creature just spoke too fast for the boy to understand. Yes, Izuku. You are good. Shota responded, ruffling his hair. Nizu's okay. He isn't hurt. Izuku purred and trilled at the response. Despite Shota being happy with him again, Izuku was still unsatisfied with his current lot in life. He still wanted to leave. He needed to leave. Thus, his mind was right back where it had started. Izuku was left bored and anxious and hyper with no outlet in sight. Aizawa was to take the kid home today. It had been a little over a week since Izuku had woken in the hospital, and it was obvious that the child was growing anxious. Each day the child seemed to struggle more when it came to focus. He was often caught pacing the room whenever he was left alone. The child needed to get out and exercise. He needed to play and enjoy himself. If Izuku was forced to remain in the hospital, Aizawa had a feeling they would be nearing the line of neglect. Children needed to play. They needed social interaction and freedom. Thus far, Izuku had none of that. By moving him from the forest, the kid had actually lost what little he had. He was unable to be active. The friends and family that he had made of the animals had been taken away, and he had practically no freedom to do what he wished. The child was secluded in a 12 by 12 room with no windows and a door that he hadn't figured out how to work. It was cruel in its own right. So, Aizawa had made sure to prepare his new apartment as quickly as possible. It was built on the edge of UA property, just outside the gates. Nizu had easily had the specialized home built in only 4 days, leaving Aizawa to move in and set it up for a child. Hisashi and Namiri, his boyfriend and second best friend, were still setting things up in the home. Aizawa found the prospect quite ridiculous, if he were being honest. Hisashi had rented a moving truck for the occasion, though the thing was barely a quarter full when the previous apartment had been cleared out. Then, he and Namiri had demanded that they set up the new place, trying to scatter his bare minimum furniture about, despite the new house being 3 times larger than the one-bedroom apartment he had lived in since he was 19. When the spreading of furniture didn't work to placate them, the 2 lovable imbeciles had gone shopping. Aizawa nearly killed them both on the spot when they arrived back with more stuff than he had thought could fit in a single truck. Aizawa had gone through every purchase and made the 2 return more than a third of what they had bought, all of it small and pointless knickknacks. He did, however, allow any toys bought for Izuku to stay. Aizawa confiscated the choking hazards for a later time, not trusting the feral boy not to put things in his mouth, but had allowed everything else to be placed in the child's new room. Izuku was given the largest room in the home, much to Hisashi's chagrin. Come on, show. The master bedroom is for the adult. Yamada had whined. What happens when I stay over? It will be crowded. My new room is still larger than the old one. We will survive. But he's just a kid. He doesn't need all that space. He won't even be in his room much. He'll be playing and hanging out with friends. That kid, Aizawa said with a withering glare, can turn into a bear, Zashi. Yamada's step stuttered before he looked over at Aizawa with a sheepish smile. He also can't speak Japanese, or any human language. For that matter. I doubt he will be making friends right away. Aizawa continued. Alright, Yamada said, his bottom lip protruding in a pout. I can't believe you are going to be a dad. Namiri laughed as she came up behind the 2. I don't think Yamada's mature enough to date someone with a kid. Yamada's pout grew larger as he whined. Don't be mean, Kayama. I'm mature. For a 12-year-old. Aizawa deadpanned. After a few more jabs at one another, and Aizawa clarifying that he was Izuku's caretaker, not the child's father, Aizawa had left to pick the boy up. Izuku was in for a big day, and Aizawa could only hope that he was prepared for any drawbacks. Aizawa stopped by the laptop that had a live feed of the cameras in the child's room. The kid was pacing once more, hands FSTNG in his hair, a sign of frustration. Aizawa didn't blame him. The man would be frustrated if he were locked away in isolation too. Aizawa sighed and walked towards the room, slowly opening the door as he called out so that the boy wouldn't be frightened. Izuku had jumped at him as Aizawa entered, burying his face in Aizawa's stomach with a happy coo. The wolf tail he was sporting waved happily behind him, while the ears twitched atop his head. Shota! Shota! The child cheered. Shota, Izuku good. The child said, looking up happily. Aizawa nodded at the boy, petting a hand through his hair. I'm glad you were good, Izuku. The tail waved even harder at the praise. Izuku, listen. Aizawa said, drawing the boy's attention. You are going to leave. We are going home today. He said slowly. Izuku had only learned a few of the words and very clearly was confused by the meaning of what Aizawa had just said. The man sighed, going to the side of the room and fetching the picture flashcards that Nizu used to teach the boy. He pulled out the hospital picture and pointed to it. Hospital, the boy said, puffing out his chest in pride. Hospital, Aizawa corrected, taking the picture of Izuku out of the stack. Izuku is at the hospital. He motioned about the room. The child looked at him blankly, his waving tail slowing slightly. Aizawa pulled out the car picture. Car, Izuku said, drawing out the last sound. Yes, car. Aizawa agreed before pulling out the picture of a house. Home, Izuku said. Aizawa nodded. Home. Aizawa lawed out the photos on the bed. He held the picture of Izuku in his hand. Izuku is at a hospital. You are at a hospital, he said, placing the photo of Izuku over the one of the hospital. Then, he moved the photo over to the car. Izuku will ride in a car. You will ride in a car, he said, repeating the sentence slowly. Vroom. Izuku cheered. Yes, vroom, Aizawa said as he moved the car and Izuku picture over to the house photo. Izuku is going home. You and me are going home, Aizawa said. The boy picked up the car picture and waved it in the air. Vroom, Aizawa sighed. He really hoped the kid would be okay with everything today. Izuku, where is your shirt? He asked. No shirt. The boy pouted. Aizawa gave him a stern look. Get your shirt. The boy's ears folded back against his head as he got up off the bed. The boy side-eyed him before ducking under the bed. When he came back up, his tail and ears had changed into those of a cat. Aizawa had learned that Izuku often used the cat features when he wanted to show displeasure. He sighed, shaking his head as he took the shirt from the child. As it slipped over Izuku's head, the tail began swishing angrily. I know you don't like it, but humans wear clothes. No close. Izuku, no close. Izuku pouted, tugging at the shirt. The child knew better than to take it off by this point, though. Bad clothes. Clothes are good, Aizawa said calmly. They keep you warm. The boy continued to pout and tug at the offending article. Izuku, no close. Bad close. Aizawa sighed once more and shook his head. The chance of getting pants on the boy was slim to none, so Aizawa didn't even try. Maybe he could get the kid some dresses to get him out of the ratty, oversized shirt. That might look at least a little more presentable. Izuku, we are leaving, Aizawa said slowly as he stood. The child's eyes went wide as tears started falling down his cheek. No. No. Shota, stay. Shota, stay. Izuku begged, clinging onto the dark-haired man's shirt. Close, good. Izuku, good. Shota, stay. The child said hurriedly. Aizawa rubbed a hand through the knotted hair and leaned down to scoop the child up. Izuku is leaving too, he said softly. The boy, who was now clutching onto his capture weapon, stilled and leaned back to look Aizawa in the eye. Izuku leave? Yes. Izuku is leaving with Shota. The boy's eyes went wide for a moment before he yipped happily. Izuku good? Izuku leave? He asked, bouncing slightly in Aizawa's arms. Yes, Aizawa said. The man gathered the deck of picture cards and tucked them away in a bag. Other than that, the child had nothing else. The trip down the hall was more eventful than Aizawa had hoped. Every person that Aizawa passed earned a growl from Izuku. After each growl, Aizawa would huff and warn the child to stop. Izuku good. Izuku safe. The child would mutter under his breath, putting the back of Aizawa's head as if he were the one in need of comfort. Getting into the car seemed to be an even greater challenge. The hospital was fairly private, but the sounds of being outdoors had excited the boy. Izuku wiggled in his arms, trying to get away, but Aizawa held firm. No. Izuku, stay. Aizawa said sternly. The kid continued to struggle, looking around wildly at the few trees decorating the car park. His hands pushed against Aizawa's chest and he whined high in his throat. Look, Izuku, Aizawa said softly. Car. The boy paused, looking around and pointing. Car, 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 he said, pointing at each and every car in the lot as Aizawa walked to the one that Nizu had gotten to take him and Izuku to UA. The thing looked just like the picture that was on one of the cards. Red sedan with 4 doors. A driver sat in the front. Aizawa nodded at him before opening the back door. Nizu had been smart enough to get a car with a privacy panel so Izuku wouldn't flip out at, or distract the driver. Aizawa ducked into the car with the boy in his arms, closing the door behind him quickly. He checked both doors and was relieved to find they were already child-locked. Izuku struggled in his arms, finally getting free and leaning over to the window, pushing on it as hard as he could. The boy clenched his fist and banged at the glass, whimpering and crying before turning to Aizawa, eyes full of hurt and betrayal. One cage to another. Shota, tree. The kid whimpered, pointing out the window. Not right now. Aizawa said softly. The kid wilted, head bowing and hands tucking into his chest while silent tears continued to cascade from his eyes. Aizawa's heart ached at the sight. Aizawa reached out to the boy slowly, wrapping his arms around him and petting his hair gently. Later. We can play later. We can go outside in the trees later. Aizawa assured. The kid sniffed, not knowing the word later yet. Aizawa took out his phone and dialed Nizu. Aizawa-san. The principal chirped. I have him in the car. He's upset that he couldn't spend time outside. Aizawa said, his voice lacking any emotion. I expected that. The principal said. He can roam around outside once he gets to UA. I have a leash for him. Aizawa paused, pulling the phone from his ear and looking down at it unnerved. Did you say you got a leash for a child? Aizawa asked, putting the phone back to his ear. Yes. That way we won't lose him. This will only work if he doesn't transform, of course. I'm not putting a leash on a child. Oh please. It is quite a common practice. Nizu said. Izuku will wear a backpack with a clasp to keep it on him. Then, a leash connects to the back. It is often used with toddlers who like to wander. Aizawa sighed. The leash actually didn't sound that bad now that he wasn't picturing the child getting choked back by a dog collar. When we arrive, you should be the one to open the door. He didn't respond well to the people we passed in the hall. I understand. Nizu said happily before the line went dead. After Izuku settled some, Aizawa attempted to buckle him in. The kid was having none of it, though. No! The child yelled, batting off Aizawa's hands as he tried to buckle the boy into the booster seat he was to sit in. You have to, Izuku. Aizawa said. It's for your safety. Izuku's safe. The boy said, still batting away Aizawa's hands. Izuku safe. Izuku good. Aizawa groaned as he sat back. After a bit, he took his own seatbelt and buckled himself in. Shota is safe. He said. Then, he unbuckled. Shota is not safe. He said. After a while the child seemed to catch on. He nervously grabbed at the belt and pulled. Izuku safe? Yes. That will keep you safe. Aizawa said, grabbing the belt and finally buckling the boy in. Izuku squirmed under the restraint, his breath coming quicker as he tried to adapt to the new experience. No. No. No safe. Izuku said, batting at the belt across his chest. Bad. He said, pulling at the thing. Aizawa gently laid his hand across Izuku's chest. Good. He said softly. Safe. It took 30 minutes for Izuku to stop tugging at the seatbelt. When that happened, Aizawa knocked on the privacy barrier to inform the driver to move. Izuku leaned forward and copied. When the car jerked back, the boy yelped, sitting back quickly and staring at Aizawa with wide eyes. It's okay. You're safe. Aizawa assured, petting the boy's curls. As the car continued down the road, however, the child grew more and more anxious. He tried looking out the window but turned back to Aizawa quickly, looking green. The ears atop his head were folded down and he continuously made whimpering noises. After a while, the quiet sounds grew in volume and Izuku ended up yowling at the top of his lungs, hands clawing at the window, his seatbelt, and Aizawa. The dark-haired man spoke reassurances to the boy the whole time, trying to calm him to no avail. When the car finally came to a stop inside the gates of UA, Aizawa heaved a great sigh of relief. The boy had gone back to whimpering pitifully, batting his hand at the window. Aizawa unbuckled himself and then the boy right before the door opened. Izuku bolted over Aizawa when the door opened, running on all four limbs as if he were in animal form. When the child was about 50 feet away, he stopped and promptly puked all over the sidewalk. He isn't fond of cars. Aizawa told Nizu, who nodded his head solemnly. Neither was I, at first. The principal said before a smile lit up his face. Freedom. Sweet, glorious freedom. The car, or the monster, as Izuku now decided to call it, was a nightmare. The rumbling and jolting growl had him on edge the entire time. The too fast passing of the outside made him nauseous and his ears rang with the multitude of sounds that invaded his senses as the monster moved. To top it off, he was trapped in one spot by the safe strap. Shota was usually smart, but Izuku was pretty sure someone had tricked him about the safe strap. That was not safe. It was dangerous and restrictive. Izuku had been prevented from moving around to try and ease the dizzying sounds hurting his ears. He couldn't curl up next to Shota for comfort. He couldn't try to distract himself with the kneading movements that he used when he got upset. All in all, the car monster was to forever be avoided from now on. As soon as he escaped, Izuku bolted as far as he could before his stomach finally gave up. The heaving hurt his stomach and the acidic vomit stung his throat. But even that was better than being trapped in the beast called a car. Shota was rubbing his back when Izuku was finally able to stop getting sick. He was murmuring soft words and telling Izuku that he was good and safe. Car bad. Izuku panted out with a whimper. Car not good, he said, trying to make sure that Shota understood. Not safe. Shota only soothed him some more, obviously not understanding the danger that they had just been in. Izuku shuddered to think of how this alpha was still alive. As he calmed, certain things started to come to Izuku that made his heart soar. Wind brushed at the tips of his ears. Grass curled around his fingers and knees. Bright sunlight filtered in through his eyes, unobstructed by the solid air that had kept him trapped in the car monster. Izuku perked up as he slowly realized that he was outside. Over to his right was a large forest. The leaves of the trees seemed to beckon Izuku towards it and the boy obeyed its call. Izuku instinctively knew it wasn't his forest, but he scrambled to go to it anyway. The boy had managed to make friends with the animals in his forest, it couldn't be too hard to do the same here. He could make a new home. Maybe Shota could come visit and bring him the multitude of food that he seemed to procure from thin air. As he ran, Izuku transformed into his cat form, hoping to swiftly make his escape. Unfortunately, the form didn't hold long. For the gazillionth time since staying with Shota, he was forcefully taken out of his animal form. This was different from when he felt the sharp pain. Instead of a cold emptiness, it felt more like a wall was built up around the warmth in his chest. It blocked him from reaching out and tugging on the transformation, but Izuku could still rest assured that the ability was still there. The wall was just as annoying, however, and made Izuku huff out in irritation as he clawed at his chest. He wanted the wall to go away. He had places to be, a forest to explore, a den to dig. Izuku picked himself up from where he had landed face first into the ground after being forcefully changed back. He shook his head and started running towards the forest again, this time using his clumsy two-leg body. Unfortunately, something wrapped around him and drew the boy back quickly. Shota was holding the ends of his scarf that was mostly wrapped around Izuku. His eyes were glowing red and his hair stood on end. Izuku yelped at the sight, closing his eyes and bowing his head at the threatening presentation. The scarf quickly unraveled and Izuku fell onto all fours, bowing low while he looked up at Shota through his lashes. The man's eyes weren't glowing any longer and his hair wasn't floating, but Izuku didn't trust the sudden change. He had done something to upset the alpha and he needed to fix it. Izuku slowly crept towards Shota, emitting a low purr that the man seemed to like. The boy then leaned up, reaching for the man. Shota picked him up immediately, allowing Izuku to lick at his chin while he asked for forgiveness. "You say sorry," Shota said softly. "Sorry. Sorry." Izuku mimicked softly, liking at the man's chin again. Sorry. Izuku wasn't exactly sure what that word meant, but it always pleased Shota when he copied. So he said the word over and over until he was shushed and moved further from the forest. Nizu was standing there, holding Izuku's shirt in his paw. The mammal handed it over to Shota and all too soon, Izuku was placed back into the annoying thing. Izuku was itching to go run, but stayed put, not wanting to upset the Dark Alpha again. Shota was speaking with Nizu in the fast way they normally used when not speaking to Izuku. It bothered him a little bit that he was being ignored. The child pawed at Shota's leg, keening high in his throat when the man barely gave him a glance. Shota always looked when Izuku made that sound. Izuku was pretty sure he wasn't a fan of the sound. The man crouched and looked Izuku in the eye. "Do you want to play? Play? Play." Izuku was pretty sure that word was on the flashcards, but he couldn't quite remember what it meant. So, he tilted his head at Shota's words, blinking his eyes slowly a few times like the owls used to do. Shota sighed again. He did that a lot when Izuku didn't understand, a lot like some of the cats in the cat clan. They didn't have as much patience as the wolves. "Shota," Izuku said worriedly. "Izuku good?" he asked. "Yes, Izuku. You are good," he said softly, hand lightly brushing his hair. "Very good." The boy trilled, leaning into the touch and smiling brightly at the man. Izuku followed Shota when he stood up and started to walk away. It didn't take long for the boy to realize they were going to the forest. The kid jumped happily as he walked, picking up a little speed as they neared. Izuku wasn't stopped this time as he started to full-on sprint into the woods. The boy changed into a wolf this time, using the strong scenting ability to scope out the area. There seemed to be very few predators here, most of them being night crawlers. That was good and bad. Without many predators, Izuku would have almost free reign during the day when he thrived. However, it would leave him lonely. Izuku was tired of being alone. His only hope was that Shota would stay with him. Maybe they could start their own two-leg pack in these woods. They'd need to be careful not to eat too much, though. The prey, just like the predators, seemed few and far between as well. There weren't many edible plants, either. The more Izuku looked around, in fact, the more he realized what a crappy forest this place really was. He'd have to figure out how to tell Shota that they needed to find a new one. At ease that there were no immediate threats, Izuku went about burning off his pent-up energy. He dashed to and fro, always keeping near Shota so that they could protect each other should something happen. The child dove in between bushes as a bear, dug into the forest ground as a wolf, and climbed up trees in his cat form, making sure that he was scenting as much as possible to mark the space. The sun had moved from an early position to almost directly overhead when Shota called to him. Izuku rushed over, turning back into a human. His chest was heaving with excitement as a grin spread ear to ear. He hadn't had so much fun in ages. Shota looked him up and down a few times before shrugging. "You need a bath," he stated. Izuku jumped at the idea. "Wash? Bath? Izuku wash?" he asked excitedly, the wolf tail beating happily behind him. Izuku had learned to enjoy bath time. He simply needed to make sure he didn't have cat features when he did so. Shota had shown him the power of towels and had proven that Izuku didn't have to be cold after being in the water. Where once, Izuku would feel sick and shaky after getting wet, he could now feel content and clean. The naked skin of his two-leg form was always softer after a bath and it was much easier to sleep after getting so warm from the magic water. Izuku had figured out the silver branches too. He could turn them off and on whenever he liked, so long as he asked first. Shota always wanted to be in the room with him when he did so after the second day when he forgot to turn the branch water off. But that was fine because he could still do it. Things were much easier to do now that he could use his hands more. Wolves and cats can't grab stuff like raccoons and humans. It makes life so much harder a lot of the time, but Izuku put up with it in order to not be shunned. Now, he didn't have to make things so hard. Shota liked Izuku to use his hands over his mouth. "Bath. Shota wash Izuku." Izuku cheered as Shota led him out of the wood. Shota merely grunted his approval at the excitement. Upon entering the clearing, Izuku froze, latching onto Shota and taking a step back with a whimper. Another two-leg alpha was standing there with a small pack of his own. The new alpha had bright yellow hair that was standing on end. He was waving wildly and barking out loud words that made Izuku's ears twitch in pain. He was clearly upset. This wasn't good. As Aizawa stepped out of the woods with Izuku following behind, the loud voice of his boyfriend hit his ears. Aizawa groaned when the kid shrunk back, growling low in his own throat, though his ears and tail showed that he was more afraid than angry. Aizawa laid a hand in the kid's hair and patted him a few times. "It's okay. It's safe. They are friends," he said softly. The boy merely glanced at him for a moment before the low growl started back up. Aizawa sighed as he scooped up the child. Izuku had lost his shirt somewhere in the woods and was thus quite naked. It would probably be better to hide his body a little anyway to make the others more comfortable. Yamada wasn't the only new person present. Kayama and, to Aizawa's surprise, Best Jeanist, were also present. The group chatted animatedly as Aizawa approached with the kid. The child's growling only grew louder as they neared. The sound eventually gained the group's attention. "Aizawa! He's naked. Don't you know to at least dress a child?" Yamada cried out. Izuku only growled louder, tensing in Aizawa's arms as he studied the blonde intently. "He took his clothes off in the forest." Aizawa grumbled. "He doesn't like them." Yamada made a show of rolling his eyes. "Hello, little listener." Yamada cooed to the child, staying back from Aizawa and the child at the glare that Izuku aimed towards him. "He doesn't seem fond of me, huh?" Yamada asked with a small smile. "I think he sees you as a threat," Aizawa said. "It's good to see you, Best Jeanist. Been a while." Aizawa greeted the older hero politely. "The pleasure is mine. And please, call me Hakamata while I'm off duty," the man said with a flourish of his hands. Izuku bit back a yelp at the sudden motion, lunging forward with a snap of his teeth whilst still maintaining his death grip on Aizawa's capture weapon. The group stepped back a few paces at his response. "All right. No loud noises. No big movements," Aizawa warned. "He can and will turn into a bear and bite your hand off." The three newcomers nodded. Aizawa shifted the boy in his arms, calling his name to grab his attention. "Kid, they are friends. Safe." Izuku shook his head. "Not safe," he whispered, somehow managing to continue the growl deep in his chest. "Bad. Don't bite." Aizawa warned the boy, but Izuku once again didn't seem to agree. "Izuku bite bad humans." The child whispered fiercely while tugging at Aizawa's sleeve. "Not safe. Leave." "No. Stay," Aizawa said, taking a few steps towards the group. The child whimpered, burying his face in Aizawa's neck as they came closer. Despite the threatening growl emanating from Izuku, the boy was shaking like a leaf. "What are you doing here?" Aizawa asked. We wanted to see your child, Aizawa. Kayama said happily. We couldn't miss his first day home. His home is outside the gates. He already has to meet with Recovery Girl. You guys are going to overwhelm him. You just want to keep him to yourself. Yamada pouted. Aizawa rolled his eyes with a huff before turning to Hakamada. Are you here for Nizu? No, actually. Hakamada said. I'm here to give the kid a haircut. Nizu said it may be more difficult than normal. He didn't want to chance the boy harming a civilian. Aizawa nodded. It'll take some time for him to warm up. The dark-haired man risked taking a few more steps towards the group and stopped when Izuku's nails bit into his chest. The child's ears were flat against his head and the wolf tail was tucking between his legs. The kid continued to growl and shake but had also started keening at Aizawa, whispering that it wasn't safe every now and then. Aizawa sighed as he sat the boy on the ground, bending down with him. Izuku yelped when he realized their position and pushed at Aizawa. Up! He demanded, glancing back at Yamada in fear. Shota! Not safe. Not safe. Up! Stand! Up! No, Aizawa said calmly. It is safe. They are friends. The eraser hero beckoned for Yamada to come down to their level, his eyes warning the man that this might not end well. Yamada knelt down anyway, keeping his hands visible and low. It's all right, little listener. I'm safe. He said softly. The boy turned in an instant, baring his teeth at Yamada while he stood protectively in front of Aizawa, arms held out as if he were a shield. Aizawa activated his quirk just as the child started transforming. Izuku snarled and clawed at his chest when his quirk didn't activate. It's fine, Aizawa. Maybe he'll be more comfortable as an animal. Yamada said, keeping his voice soft and gentle. He will attack you. If he does, then you can stop him. I just ask you do so before he rips my throat out. The man said with a small laugh. Aizawa rolled his eyes, closing them in a blink. When his eyes reopened, the child was replaced with a dark green wolf. His hackles were raised and his ears remained flat against his head. He snarled and growled whilst still standing protectively in front of Aizawa. Then, for a reason Aizawa couldn't understand, the child relaxed. He started to sniff at the air as the fur on his back began to lay flat once more. The wolf calmed almost instantly as it sat back on its haunches and tilted its head in the familiar way the boy showed confusion and question. Just as suddenly as Izuku had become a wolf, he changed back into a human, inching closer to Yamada. The boy moved slowly, as if afraid Yamada may attack. When he reached the man, he lied back on the ground, showing his stomach submissively before rolling back up and liking along Yamada's chin. Oh good. He likes you. Aizawa drawled. That makes things much easier. The boy backed off and his ears flattened against his head once more as he looked at the blonde. Izuku bad? He whimpered, backing away slowly. Izuku is good. Aizawa said, pulling the boy back towards him at the obvious show of fear. You are good. The boy looked at Aizawa and then back at Yamada. His gaze was high, eyeing the man's hair. Oh. He thinks you are angry. Aizawa said. Because of your hair. My hair? It's standing up. He thinks I'm angry when I use my quirk, too. Yamada chuckled nervously before beckoning the boy forward. Izuku refused to leave the safety of Aizawa's arms. Thus, Aizawa moved forward instead. Hisashi gently grasped Izuku's hand and ran it along his gel-hardened hair. It's all good, little listener. It's just my style. I'm not mad. The trembling kid seemed to start understanding as he pet at the hair a few more times. Shota, the child said in wonder, grabbing at Aizawa's own hand and moving it to Yamada's hair, not bad. Good. Friend. Yeah, kid. That's what I've been telling you. Aizawa said with an amused huff. As soon as he seemed content with Yamada, Izuku turned to the other two, his tail slowly starting to wag behind him. I'm Kayama. The woman said as she leaned down. You are so cute. Hakamada. Best Jeanist spoke, squatting to be on Izuku's level as well. Izuku looked back at Aizawa in confusion and Aizawa went over everyone's names once more, guiding the child's hand to each of the heroes' chests, just as he had done when teaching Izuku his own name. What he had first thought was an attacking alpha, was actually a friend. Izuku almost couldn't keep up with this realization as Shota introduced him to his mate. Yamada reeked of Shota's scent, just as Shota smelled of Yamada. It was a little disconcerting to realize. Izuku had seen 2 male animals and 2 female animals together before, but he hadn't expected it of Shota. Perhaps that is why the alpha had taken Izuku on so willingly. He couldn't have pups without being mated with a female, after all. Maybe Izuku was going to be his new pup. Yamada's hair was stiff with something, making it stand on end in a threatening manner. Izuku found it odd to do this, but then again, it made sense to help ward off possible threats. Perhaps this other alpha was simply making himself look more threatening to aid his pack. After all, two legs had few defenses. In the end, the idea was pretty smart and Izuku had to give Shota credit for choosing the intelligent mate. So often mates were chosen based on strength. Sometimes, however, the best leaders were the smart ones. After being introduced to some of what Izuku assumed to be Shota's pack, the boy had followed the group inside a large building. The air was cold inside the building and Izuku shivered as small bumps raised along his arms. For once, Izuku wished he had his shirt. At least it could keep him a little more warm. "Izuku's shirt?" he asked, tugging at Shota's sleeve. The man snorted and shook his head as he picked Izuku up. "No shirt," he said. "You lost it." Izuku wasn't exactly sure what "lost" was, but it must mean it wasn't around anymore. The boy grumbled under his breath. Of course. The one time he wanted to wear the shirt, Aizawa didn't have it. Two legs were so strange in their ways. The group walked up to another room that smelled like the hospital Izuku had just left. He huffed when they walked inside, moving into Shota's side in an attempt to make him exit the room again. "No. No hospital. No. Izuku good. Izuku listen," he said, trying to convince the man not to leave him in the room again. Shota only shook his head and walked on, keeping a firm grasp on the boy's shoulder as he went. Another, shorter two-leg, was waiting in the room. Izuku tensed almost immediately but quickly calmed when none of the other pack members seemed frightened. The little two-leg came up to him and puffed out a greeting. Chiyo was old. Izuku could tell right away by the way she held herself, so similar to any other animals who lived past their prime. As an elder, Chiyo was to be respected. The others in the group seemed to agree with this too, causing Izuku great relief. He didn't know if he could obey a custom that didn't respect those who had lived long. The two legs were strange in many ways, but overall, they seemed to share the core values with the cats, the wolves, or both, in some way or another. The old lady checked him over a whole lot, lifting his arms and making him open his mouth to show off his teeth. In the end, she must have approved because she gave him food. The sticky things were sweet and tasted similar to the berries that he found on trees. He wanted more than just the few measly scraps, but Chiyo did not give any more up, even when Izuku begged. The boy pouted at the refusal, but his attention was eventually drawn to Hakamata. The man seemed the most calm of the three new people that Izuku had met outside. He didn't speak very loudly, but he still made those wide, crazed movements that the others had. In a way, it reminded Izuku of how some of the birds would fluff up their feathers when trying to mate. It was ridiculous, but funny all the same once you got used to it. Hakamata had a set of claws with him. The claws could be shared among the pack and were shown to Izuku with a stern "don't touch" from Shota. Izuku snorted a little at the warning. Why would he need fake claws? He had his own whenever he wanted, at least, unless his transformation decided not to work. That seemed to happen pretty frequently as of late. A blanket, at least that's what the humans called it, was put down on the floor. Izuku was told to sit on a chair in the middle of it and stay. Shota sat in front of him, talking and showing Izuku his flashcards while Hakamata did something behind him. As Izuku copied the word cup, a snip sounded from behind him. The boy jumped at the sound, bolting forward and hiding in Shota's chest before looking back. Hakamata was standing there with the fake claws and a tuft of green fur. No, not fur, hair. Izuku's hair. The boy gaped at him as he felt behind his back for the tangled mess. Shota started quieting him as soon as the growls started. "It's okay, Izuku. It's okay. Hakamata is helping. He's safe." Izuku snorted. Hakamata may be part of the pack, but using claws on someone's fur, hair, was the opposite of safe. Shota tried to get Izuku to sit back in his spot again, but the boy fought back. "No. No, Shota. Not safe. Hurt," he said, pointing at the sharp object. "Hurt. Not good. Bad," he explained. Shota only shook his head again and coaxed Izuku back into the spot. The boy was on high alert now. Even as Shota went over the words with him, he listened intently to what was happening behind him. Izuku heard the slide of the fake claws opening and spun, transforming into a wolf, as he already had those types of ears and it would be easiest. He knocked the fake claws out Hakamata's hand and dug his own, real claws, into the man's chest. It wasn't enough to make the man bleed, but it should be enough of a warning. Pups almost never stood up to higher members in the pack, but when it came to their lives, it was permitted. Izuku was disappointed to see that Shota didn't agree. Izuku was forced back into his human form once more and pulled away from Hakamata. Shota's hair was raised again, the glowing eyes bearing into him until he backed down with a whimper. "It is safe," Shota said, hair still raised. "Stay still." Izuku whimpered again as Shota put him back in a sitting position, his hair never falling and his eyes never ceasing their stare. Shota remained watching, his angry disposition not leaving as more snips sounded behind Izuku. The boy flinched with each one but did not dare move when the Dark Alpha had very specifically told him not to. Not when Shota was so angry. Shota seemed to be angry a lot today. After a while, the snipping stopped and Shota's hair dropped back down by his shoulders. He wiped his thumb across Izuku's cheek to dry some of the tears that had started falling. Izuku flinched back at the touch. "It's okay," Shota said softly. "I'm sorry. I needed you to stay still," he said softly. "Izuku, bad," Izuku said, more tears springing to his eyes. No, you are still good. You shouldn't have attacked, but you were scared. It's okay. Attack." Izuku mimicked, looking hopefully at the man when he said the new word. Shota's face softened as he nodded. "Yes, very good." Izuku smiled hesitantly at the reaction. Shota and Hakamata speak to each other a bit before Aizawa sighs, looking at Izuku carefully. He reaches out a hand and suddenly, Shota has the fake claws. The dark-haired man grunts and reaches for a piece of his hair and cuts it off. Izuku flinches at the sound once more, and then stares at Shota in confusion. "Safe," Shota says. "Safe," Izuku says back. Then, the man reaches for a bit of Izuku's hair that is falling over his eyes. He brings the fake claws forward and cuts it off. Izuku doesn't flinch this time. Hakamata takes over from there. Izuku stayed as still as he could, slightly more anxious with the new person taking control of the fake claws, but Shota is holding his hand and he keeps saying that it's safe. Izuku wants to believe him. He has to believe him because he doesn't think this will stop even if Izuku thought Shota was the worst liar on the planet. After a little more time, Hakamata steps back and smiles. "Done," the man said happily. "Done," Izuku mimicked. After the haircut, Aizawa gave the kid a well-deserved bath. He was able to really lather soap into the child's hair and Aizawa savored the fact that the boy would actually be clean this time. For the first time, Aizawa could comb Izuku's hair. Despite his hair not falling into his face when it was dry, the water-heavy curls straightened almost to the kid's nose when combed down. It was almost amusing to watch them pop back into place after a bit. The hair at the back of his head was much the same. When dry, the curls rested near the top of his neck, yet they straightened out to his shoulders with the aid of water and a comb. "Enjoying yourself, Sho?" Hisashi snorted after a while. Aizawa glared at the man. "I've spent the last 7 months looking at a rat's nest of hair. I get to enjoy brushing it out." By this point, Best Jeanist had left, needing to attend to other business. Recovery Girl was with Nizu in the principal's office. Thus, only Kayama and Yamada remained in the room with Aizawa and Izuku. Aizawa set down the comb as Izuku turned in his lab, cuddling close to his chest with a soft purr. In a matter of minutes, the child was asleep. "That a real kid?" Kayama said in awe. "Like, a breathing, living child." "Yes, he is. And he's clinging to you," Hisashi murmured. "I am aware." Aizawa deadpanned. "You're only 24. Kayama put forth. "I know my own age, Kayama. You were still in high school when he was born," Kayama said. Aizawa glared at her. "Are we stating basic facts for a reason? You didn't even want to take care of a cat back then, you still wouldn't want to take care of a cat," Yamada said softly, dragging his own fingers through the curly green locks on the child. Aizawa grunted in response. "How the hell did Nizu convince you to take on a human child?" Yamada finally asked. "I have no idea," Aizawa said with a sigh. When Izuku woke up, he was somewhere new. The walls of the den room were colored a soft green, only interrupted by deep brown areas of slatted wood that interspaced 2 of the 4 walls. The floor was covered in, what looked like, soft grass, but the smell was off. The grass wasn't real, or at least, it wasn't grass that was safe to eat. The cold strands felt soothing underfoot as Izuku explored the new space. Izuku had woken up on a large, round bed, filled with a bunch of soft blankets and pillows that he could wrap around himself to keep warm at night. The colors were all natural browns, greens, and blue-grays. The bed frame was made of a light wood, the same as the rest of the furniture in the room. To one side, there was a tall platform that Izuku didn't know the name of yet. It had a bunch of openings that he pulled on. He tugged one of the openings too much and the entire thing came tumbling out, a bunch of shirts and other clothes falling to the ground. Izuku stuck his head into the hole that had been created and felt around inside. The space seemed like it would make a nice cave for one of his smaller animal forms. In another part of the room was another platform, though this one was completely open. It had a bunch of things on its multiple levels. Izuku knew that the multitude of square objects were called books, but some of the other stuff dumbfounded the boy. There was a box full of soft paper that never seemed to end. Izuku pulled piece after piece, only for it to be replaced with a new tuft of white. On another shelf, was a lightweight plastic thing with a string attaching to the wall. When Izuku pressed the little switch, it glowed brightly, like the small suns in the ceiling. When Izuku tried to carry it with him, however, the string attached to the wall came out and the light turned off. No matter how much he clicked the little button, the plastic thing refused to glow again. With a huff, Izuku tossed the thing across the room without another care. The door to the room was closed, just like all the other rooms Izuku woke up in alone. It was frustrating to say the least. He had slowly started figuring out doorknobs, but most of them didn't turn unless you had the thing called a key. Izuku was pretty sure this one would be the same and thus, was pleasantly surprised when the door opened with ease. The outside area was just another long room. This one was very different from the cozy area that Izuku had just exited, though. The area was incredibly dark as no suns lightened the ceiling above. Despite this, Izuku could clearly tell that the walls were stark white, making the small boy flinch back on instinct. Was he back where he had the alone nights? Was he in the hospital again? He thought Shota said they were leaving. He didn't want to be back. Speaking of Shota, where was he? Why was Izuku left all alone again? He didn't want to be alone. He was done being alone. The tentative step out into the hall sent a shock up his body as a bare foot hit the cold, hard floor. It was not the fake grass of the room. It was not even the square floor of the hospital. It looked like trees. The brown, slightly rough floor was smoothed down and waxed over but still lent familiarity. The sudden urge to scratch his claws on the wood was too strong to overcome and Izuku very quickly took on his cat form, stretching his body as much as possible while he flexed his claws against the flooring. The place smelled fake, unclaimed. How irresponsible could humans be to leave a place unclaimed? Had Shota put him here on purpose? Didn't the Dark Alpha know how dangerous it was to leave a pup in unclaimed territory? As these thoughts crossed his mind, Izuku gave the air a good sniff, hoping to catch the scent of the man who had potentially left him for dead. Shota was all he had, after all. Until he found his way back to his forest, Shota was the only chance Izuku had at survival and comfort. Luckily, the man's scent was very evident, if a few hours old. The sharp but comforting scent, so much like that bitter drink the man had once let him taste, grew stronger the further down the corridor Izuku traveled. At the very end, a faint light permeated the darkness, beckoning the boy forward. As the boy went, he stopped along the way, curiosity tempting him to explore every inch of the place on his way to the Alpha. Izuku flip-flopped between his human and cat form as he explored, needing the human hands to open the multitude of doors that this long room held. The first door Izuku opened showed another bathroom, similar to the one that the hospital had. Izuku checked to see if the magic water was in this room too and was pleased to see that the life-giving substance did freely fall from the taps in this bathroom as well. Satisfied with this confirmation, Izuku moved on with the sound of the magic water gushing behind him. The next door down the hall showed an almost completely empty area. The only items in the room were a small stack of folded blankets, tucked into the corner. They smelled strongly of Shota when Izuku investigated them, causing the boy to take them back to the room he had originally woken up in. A deterrent for possible predators. The next door had another empty room, though this one was completely devoid of any furniture at all. Finally, the boy traversed to the end of the corridor, which opened into a much larger area. The big empty space was only marred with a thing that looked halfway between a bed and the thing in the hospital room that Shota called a chair. It was a mix of multiple colors that formed what looked to be flowers in the fabric. It smelled stale and made Izuku's cat nose tickle when he sniffed at it. To Izuku's great pleasure, Shota was lying on top of the long chair. Izuku quickly turned back into his human form and smiled at the man, about to reach out to wake him before thinking better of it. From what he had seen thus far, there were no potential dangers around the area. As the pack leader, Shota should only be woken from slumber if there was trouble. Pack leaders deserved their sleep. Pups should not wake them for something so meaningless as saying hello. So, with some reluctance, Izuku slowly backed away. He took solace in his cat form once more, feeling warmer and not as fragile with his claws and teeth to protect him. He was also quieter without his large, clumsy two-leg form hindering his movements. Better to stay quiet so as not to wake the Alpha. The small boy continued his exploration, this time using Shota as a sounding board for his travels. He went from Shota, to a wall, to Shota, to a door, that could not be opened this time, to Shota, to another wall. This last wall, however, opened up into another section of the room. With a glance back, the cat boy trotted into the area. The flooring underfoot changed, lending to the idea that this was supposed to be a separate room, despite being connected to the big area where Shota lay. The raised platforms circled the area, interrupted by a few things that Izuku had never seen before. With a jump, Izuku was on top of the platform, ready to explore. The first thing he came across was the thing called a sink. Or, at least, Izuku was pretty sure it was a sink. It was bigger than the sink in the bathroom, though it had the same basic structures. In this form, Izuku couldn't test for the water, so he didn't even try, opting to go to the next area. This new object showed Izuku's reflection just like the flat lake used to. Except, it wasn't water that greeted his paw. Instead, it was a cold, flat surface. Small circles were apparent on the flat surface, but they didn't seem to mean much. Looking around, little knobs were attached here as well. Maybe this gave off magic water too? Izuku shook his head and continued on, only to be blocked by the humming thing. A big, white appliance towered over the small cat, the back of which gave off heat but the front of which seemed to be colder than the rest of the area. It had a door on the front, the handle just asking to be grabbed by the boy. Thus far, the only door that hadn't opened was the one in the room where Shota was laying down. Maybe this one would open up to a new space? The idea was too enticing to not test, so he changed back to his two-leg form. The white door opened easily, giving off a rush of cold air that made the boy's skin prickle with the chill. Inside was mostly empty, though a big bowl of fruit sat front and center. Izuku grinned as he took a handful of the food and shoved it into his mouth. After a few more, the boy simply took the whole bowl, setting it on the ground to eat later. If this food was inside the white door, maybe more lay within its depths. A big, way too heavy, white thing sat all the way in the back. Its contents sloshed when Izuku tried to pull it forward, making Izuku even more curious. Water was the only thing that he knew of that sloshed, but water wasn't white. Perhaps, this was a human version of nursing milk? Izuku was a little old to be nursing still, but every now and then, nursing mothers allowed the older pups to have some of the sweet nectar. Maybe it was the same for humans. Izuku tugged harder at the thing, finally moving it off of the raised platform it sat on, only to have it crash into his chest. It was heavy, but not unmanageable. Izuku quickly set it on the floor and attempted to get into the container, only to find that it was impossible. His pitiful human claws did nothing to pierce the thick plastic. It seemed the white knot water would have to wait for now. Back inside the cold door, Izuku pulled one of the openings. It was similar to the one in his room, but this one did not hold a multitude of clothing. Instead, it had a bunch of cold red mush wrapped in plastic. It looked oddly like animal meat, but Izuku knew that was silly. Why would they make the meat cold? Animal meat was so much better when it was warm. If you let it get cold, it could make you sick from letting it sit too long. Izuku tossed it onto the floor with the other things he found and then turned back to the cold door once more. Back in the fridge, all that was left was another thing of plastic, wrapping around a white and yellow cube. Izuku left it as is and turned back to the fruit on the ground, his curiosity thoroughly mollified. After a little while of shoving the fruit in his face, Izuku went back into his cat form, only to do a double take of the items on the floor. A sharp scent was hitting his nose that made Izuku rethink his original take on the thing that kind of looked like meat. It was meat. Good meat. Izuku racked his brain as to why it would be wrapped up and left sitting. Maybe, the cold of the door was enough to keep it fresh? Like how the snow let food last longer? But he had thought that only worked with snow. Then again, if the meat wasn't good, why would Shota keep it around? Maybe he had caught it that day and was waiting to let Izuku have some? Maybe it was meant for Izuku to eat when he woke up? Yes, that would make sense. It had been a while since he had had meat. He never had too much meat in the forest as he was now expected to kill his own share, but it was a nice treat when he wasn't the one having to do the slaughtering. Shota probably saved the meat as a treat for the boy, before he would have to start helping the pack hunt. How kind the alpha was to the boy. Without another thought, Izuku dug his nails into the strange plastic and tore it open. With a small, excited purr, Izuku dug into the meat happily. He had never had this kind before, it was not an animal native to the forest. However, it was delicious. Although strange to eat something so cold, it did not taste rotted in the least bit, the cold of the door truly being enough to save the food. Just as the boy was halfway done, a gruff huff came from the area that connected this room to the room that Shota was in. Looking up, Izuku was met with a very stern-looking Shota, observing the cat Izuku as he dug into the food. Oh. Shota didn't like the animal forms, did he? Was Izuku breaking the rules by being a cat? Was Shota upset with him? In an instant, Izuku was back in his human form, still sitting on the ground. One hand was dug into the packet of meat and the other ran through his hair nervously. Shota good. Izuku said in greeting, smiling at the man. Izuku good. Izuku food. Then, Izuku took another mouthful. Then he thought better of doing something so stupid. If Shota was in this area, it probably meant that he wanted to eat. Izuku should have offered. Hoping it wasn't too late, Izuku held up a hand, now full of the bloody red tendrils, towards the man. Shota food? The Dark Alpha's face contorted into an expression that Izuku had never seen before. The best he could relate it to was anger, however, and Izuku whimpered. Shota, food? Izuku asked again, forming ears on his head and bending them back in SBMSN. He really must have messed up. Maybe this food wasn't for Izuku at all. Maybe it was only for Shota and Izuku had taken things that didn't belong to him. Izuku wasn't even sure if he was part of the pack yet. The boy slowly scooted forward, holding up his hand again and making sure not to make eye contact with the Alpha. Shota, food. Izuku good? The man sighed. Izuku is good, but I don't want any food. Izuku perked up at the first part in understanding. Shota wasn't mad. He must be giving Izuku a chance to make up for his actions. Shota, food. He offered again, more excited. No. Izuku backed down once more in confusion. No? He didn't want the food? Or was it that he wasn't going to lower himself to eat Izuku's seconds? Was Izuku allowed to finish? He was still so very hungry. Would Shota be upset if he ate more? How many pack members was this supposed to feed? For how long was it supposed to last? Even if Shota wasn't mad, had Izuku ruined a great meal? Would others be upset at him? Was Shota telling him to stop eating despite the rumbling still in his stomach? Or maybe Izuku was just asking wrong. Shota would accept the offer if Izuku just learned how to offer it correctly. Once accepted, it would be okay for Izuku to finish, right? Right? Shota, Izuku started, digging around in his mind for the other word that meant food. Eat. The same look crossed the Alpha's face as he denied the offer once more. Izuku whimpered. Please. Please Shota. Eat food. Izuku tried again, offering the handful even higher. A flash crossed in the man's eyes as he finally took the offering. He seemed accepting, but reluctant. It was odd to say the least. Perhaps Izuku had done just good enough. He waited patiently to see if the man would correct him, but no such correction came. Instead, Shota simply looked at the bloody mass of meat in his hand. After a few seconds, Izuku nudged Shota again. Please Shota. Food eat. Shota food please. Food please Shota eat. He tried, putting the words in a multitude of different orders, hoping that one of them was correct. Shota only sighed and shook his head before very slowly putting a small bit of the meat to his lips. If this was what having this particular kid was going to be like from here on out, Aizawa wanted to trade his in. The brat had somehow managed to sneak past Aizawa, completely empty the fridge, and then snack on the raw beef that was supposed to be Izuku's first introduction to cooked meats. How the hell the child managed to even get past Aizawa without the man waking up was a miracle. Aizawa was an incredibly light sleeper, he even woke up to the wind outside. But this kid. Aizawa shook his head as he walked in on the boy. The fridge door was wide open, the few items of food splayed on the floor. The bowl of fruit was knocked on its side, half the contents already eaten. The kid was once again devoid of any clothes, though Aizawa wasn't too surprised by that, considering he had just been in cat form. Blood from the beef dripped down the child's face and arms as he looked up at Aizawa with the large emerald eyes that seemed too innocent in a scene that looked so gruesome. Shota good. The child said, a greeting he had developed as the boy hadn't quite picked up on the word hello yet. Izuku good. Izuku food. The kid continued before taking another bite. Aizawa should be used to seeing the kid do this. He'd been watching the boy for 6 months, but something about having a child eat raw meat directly in front of you was unsettling. Aizawa grimaced at the sight before smoothing his face. Alright, how to handle this? Izuku tilted his head a little as he inspected his new handful of meat before looking up at Aizawa and offering the raw bloody mass to him. It was definitely Aizawa's imagination, but he almost thought he saw the mass pulse. A flashback from the first time he'd seen the boy do this on the monitoring screens. Shota food? Izuku offered, sticking his hand further forward. Aizawa couldn't hide his grimace this time. Izuku frowned at the look and whimpered a little, ears forming in his hair and bending back flat against his head. Shota, food? Izuku slowly moved forward, keeping his eyes downcast as he offered the beef again. Shota, food. Izuku good? How the hell was he supposed to respond to this? He knew the kid wouldn't really understand no in this situation. Izuku was already upset at his lack of facial control. He had to fix this before the boy grew more upset. But how? He sure as F wasn't accepting that bloody mush. Aizawa would die before eating that. Aizawa already wasn't a huge fan of most foods. His sense of taste was annoyingly sensitive, thus the man could tolerate very few things without being disgusted. It was one of the major reasons he ate the jelly packets so often. He could tolerate them and they tasted fine. But this kid expected him to eat raw meat? No. Aizawa sighed. Izuku is good, but I don't want any food. He finally decided. Izuku only seemed to half understand as he presented the beef once more excited with an exclamation of, "Shota food." "No," Aizawa deadpanned, making it more clear for the kid. Izuku only looked back in hurt confusion. "Shota? Eat?" Aizawa would have rejoiced at the use of the new word if it weren't for the circumstances. Please. Please Shota. Eat food." Izuku whimpered, offering the handful even higher. He was going to die today. It was the only logical conclusion, as Aizawa, for whatever reason that he couldn't quite explain to himself, took the food from the boy's hands. The cold squish between his fingers nearly made him GG. That would be why Aizawa didn't tend to cook, either. After a few seconds, Izuku nudged Aizawa. "Please Shota. Food eat. Shota food please. Food please Shota eat." Aizawa sighed at the kid's attempt to make a full sentence. How could he say no to that? Death or disappointing a child with eyes so pure he could be a FING angel? F-. The man slowly shook his head before very slowly putting a small bit of the meat to his lips. "I have arrived with your jelly packets, and other essential nutrients like vegetables." Yamada screamed from the door, lowering his voice on the second part. Not a moment later, after really taking in the scene, did a real scream cross the man's lips as fear and concern flashed across his face, followed by the look of green nausea that Aizawa was actually experiencing. Why? Yamada stuttered, looking from the beef in Aizawa's hand and then back to his face. "If you were that hungry, you could have messaged me and I would have come faster," the blonde said, attempting to laugh off his unease. A small happy yip came from the kid as he slowly rounded the floor, the fear that had initially sent him into the corner now vanishing as he recognized the voice. Yamada had his hair down this time, pulled back into a ponytail. The kid seemed much happier to discover this as he rounded the corner, creeping forward on all fours. "Yamamamada," the kid said happily, beaming wide at Yamada for remembering his name. "Yamamamada good? Izuku good." Yamada's face paled at the sight of the kid covered in blood. "What the hell have you done to this poor child?" "I didn't do anything. I was napping and woke up to it," Aizawa said back. "Right. Like I believe you slept through the kid rummaging around in the kitchen," Yamada said sarcastically. "I did," Aizawa replied, his tone dry and cold. A shiver went down both their spines as the realization hit full force once more. "A feral animal ninja child? You're screwed," Yamada whispered back. Izuku, displeased with the lack of attention, yipped loudly at the two, moving towards Yamada and giving the same offering motion as he had done to Aizawa. "Yamamamada food? Yamamamada eat? Food please Yamamamada eat? Yamamamada please eat food." The terrified deer in the headlights look that Yamada sent his way sent a sharp spike of satisfaction through Aizawa. He would like to see the blonde loudmouth try to get out of this one without upsetting the boy. "And no thanks, little listener," Yamada says weakly. "He will never make it." Izuku whimpered and tried again, using a different version of the words strung together. When Yamada denied it once more, a sniffle rang out across the room. Aizawa, who had turned to clean up the mess in the kitchen, looked over at the two sharply. Izuku was on the ground, tears streaming from his eyes as he looked up at the voice hero. He kept offering the beef, ears flat against his head and body language as SBMSSV as he could manage in his human form. Yamada was staring at the boy with wide eyes, hands coming up to wave frantically as the boy continued to cry. Aizawa glared at his boyfriend. "Yamada!" he snapped. Yamada met his eyes for a second before taking the offering and bringing it close to his mouth. "I can't believe I'm doing this," the blonde said, before taking a bite. The consequential gagging didn't seem to faze Izuku, who suddenly seemed much happier. Aizawa wasn't exactly sure if that was because he felt he had pleased the blonde, or if it was because the boy may actually be a sadistic monster out to torment people. The yellow alpha accepted his offering. He accepted. Izuku wasn't bad. He was good. He helped. He was that much closer to being completely accepted into the pack now. It wasn't terribly hard to figure out two legways once you got the language down, it seemed. They were very stuck on the idea that language was what got things done, seeming to ignore a lot of body language. It was a little straining to have to vocalize all the time, but it was worth it if it meant Shota and his pack would want Izuku. It seemed that for Shota to accept, he needed to say, "Food please Shota eat." But with Yamamamada he needed to switch the words a little, saying, "Eat food Yamamamada please." Plus, he had to get permission from the leader. It was all very complicated, but Izuku would learn in due time. When Izuku turned back to Shota, the man was playing with the fruits, placing some inside the bowl and tossing others into a different, much bigger, bowl. Izuku scampered over and tried to help, but he couldn't quite tell what food went where. However, Shota seemed more put off when Izuku put the food that was supposed to go in the bigger bowl with the plasticky bag into the small bowl. So, Izuku instead just ate food or put it in the big bowl, not even worrying about the small one. After that, Shota dumped the meat in the big bowl and moved the other items away from the boy, placing them on the platform and doing something that Izuku couldn't comprehend. While Shota was busy doing whatever it was that the human leader did, Izuku started to take things out of the big bowl, eating bite after bite of the fruit and meat that had been thrown in there. After a few pieces, Shota looked at him and snapped a sharp, "No." Izuku tilted his head in confusion, slowly reaching his hand into the overlarge bowl and presented Shota with a slightly smushed piece of green square fruit. "Food please Shota, eat," Izuku said confidently. Shota slapped his hand to his face before dragging it down. Only then did he accept the offering, washing the fruit off with the magic sink water before putting it in his mouth with a slight cringe. Izuku mimicked the slapping motion. He cried out when he hit himself a little too hard and looked at Shota with a pout. Izuku was pretty sure the Alpha had failed to warn Izuku on purpose. The resounding chuckle proved his theory. Izuku shook off the small betrayal and went to reach into the large bowl again, only to be stopped by Shota's hand. With a push, the giant bowl was pushed back and a door closed behind it, hiding it under the raised platform. Izuku yipped at the game. Shota had made the object disappear. Izuku played this with the kittens all the time. They never really understood that things didn't just cease when they couldn't see it. But Izuku did. Izuku was smart. Smarter than some of the grown-up cats, even. Izuku happily went to open the door, only to have it open a small bit before stopping. He tugged some more, but to no avail. Shota snorted again at his attempt and Izuku growled up at him playfully. So it wasn't the disappearing game. He had to figure out how to open the door. Izuku worked at the task for a while, eventually finding a little lever that was keeping the door from being opened. Unfortunately, the boy couldn't quite grasp how to make the lever move enough to open the opening. At least, not without watching Shota do it first. Shota did not show him how to open it, though. Instead, the man continued talking with his mate and messing with the food objects on top of the platform. Izuku whined in frustration after being ignored for too long. Shota barely glanced at him before turning back to do whatever it was he was doing. Izuku huffed, growing bored far too quickly without direct stimulus from the man. However, he knew better than to interrupt two mates. Izuku rubbed against Shota's legs for a bit before moving off to look around the kitchen once more. The place was filled with tiny doors that Izuku hadn't seen before. All of them stopped from opening by the same annoying lever. There were openings like the one that held the clothes in the room he woke up in, too. These, also, were blocked by the evil levers. It almost seemed like it was on purpose. Like another type of way to keep Izuku out of things. How mean. Izuku whined again after a few more minutes, but Yamamamata was being too loud for Shota to hear. The boy huffed and traversed back into the larger area where Shota had been sleeping. His hands were still slick with the blood from the meat, making his grip on the floor a little slippery, but it eventually wore off as he traveled further, the floor wiping the substance from his hands. "Izuku!" Shota called, just as Izuku reached the long chair. Izuku turned back, cat ears twitching happily. "Come here." Izuku practically sprinted back. When he reached Shota, the man picked him up and set Izuku on his hip. Shota usually did this when Izuku was sad, but it seemed the hold was meant for other things too as Shota walked him across the whole house and into the bathroom. It was like when mamas held their young by the scruff. Shota took him into the bathroom and sighed as he turned off the sink that Izuku had left running earlier. He plopped the boy into the tub and started the water quickly. "Izuku bath?" Izuku said. "Yes. A fast bath." "Fast." Izuku mimicked. The boy sat down, trying to plug the water up, but Shota stopped him. "No. We are doing this quickly. Fast. Fast." Izuku said again. Shota grabbed a rag and wet it, wiping Izuku down enough to clean him of the blood and fruit leftovers that stuck to his hands and face. Then, he took Izuku out of the bath. The boy cried at this. "No. Izuku bath. Izuku good bath." Izuku shouted, wanting to play. "No," Shota replied, drying him off with a towel. Izuku pouted at the man but followed his lead when he was led into the room he had woken up in. Shota paused in the doorway, looking around the area before sighing again. "How did I not wake up to this? How, wake this?" Izuku tried to copy, missing a few words as he spoke. Shota only gave him a weak smile. The first thing that happened when they entered the room was Izuku being placed in a shirt. He hated the shirts. Why couldn't Shota just leave it alone? But Izuku relented, having long given up on the idea that Shota would let him escape without one. The next thing to happen was Shota showing him the things called pants. Izuku full-on growled at the garment, backing away from it and trying to escape the room. Yamamamata blocked the doorway. No! Izuku shouted. No pants. No Shota. No. Shota merely grunted and beckoned Izuku towards him. Izuku shook his head defiantly. Come now, Izuku. Pants are good. No Yamamamata. No pants. Yamada. Shota said, pointing to the man. Just Yamada. Izuku understood immediately and corrected himself. No Yamada. Pants bad. Shirt bad. No pants. No shirt. Izuku yelled, pulling at the shirt and tossing it off of himself. Shota did not look pleased by his actions, eyes sharp, lips curved down into a steady frown, and a small huff escaping his lips. His motions were choppier than before, showing his ire. Izuku's ears went back and he huddled closer to the ground, but he still refused to put those things back on. If Shota needed him to wear a shirt, fine. But if he thought that meant Izuku would wear pants, he was sorely mistaken. It seemed to Izuku that if Shota succeeded in getting him in one clothing piece easily, he would push the second. So Izuku would make sure to be as difficult as was acceptable with the first, so Shota wouldn't even attempt the second. Unfortunately for Izuku, Shota seemed to suddenly develop a load of patience. After what seemed to be ages, Shota still hadn't given up. Yamada had joined in as well and Izuku couldn't evade the both of them very easily. In the end, they had actually given up on the shirt, insisting on the pants instead. It was torture. This was not what Izuku had wanted to happen. After Izuku had escaped the pants for what was probably the 100th time, Shota finally lost his patience, his hair rising as his eyes glared red. Izuku hid behind Yamada at the look, shaking his head back and forth but going limp when Aizawa grabbed him again, dressing him in the constricting fabric. The pants only went to his knee and were pretty loose, overall not a terrible feeling. But it was the fact that he had to wear them at all that upset Izuku. 2 legs were stupid. Pants were stupid. Izuku didn't like this at all. Water fell down his cheeks as it so often did in this form. None of the other animals ever seemed to do this, but Izuku had a knack for making water come out of his eyes. He wiped at the streams with a frustrated huff as his breath hitched in his chest. He was so mad. He hoped the water was a clear sign for 2 legs that showed this. He wanted Shota to know. He wanted the Alpha to know that he had upset Izuku this bad. Shota did seem to know about the water as he wiped at Izuku's cheeks and his face softened. He gathered Izuku close in an attempt to be comforting to the boy, despite batting the boy's hands away from the hem of the pants. After a bit, Shota pulled back, gathering Izuku in his arms again and heading into the big area. He pointed to things and said words that Izuku didn't know yet. The boy knew the man was trying to get him to copy, but Izuku was too upset, still. He felt funny in the pants. Trapped. Shota didn't seem to be terribly upset by his lack of interest and effort, so Izuku continued the behavior, reveling in the satisfaction a little. He didn't want to make things hard for Shota, but there were limits. Izuku might have a 2-leg form, but he had a multitude of other forms too. There were more forms that didn't wear clothes than there were forms that did. Thus, he shouldn't have to wear these things. He was less human than anything else, so he shouldn't have to follow all the customs. Didn't Shota understand? Upon entering the main area, Izuku noticed that his bloody footprints and handprints no longer covered the floor. When Shota took him into the room with the food, everything had been picked up. A new bowl was sitting on the shiny surface, and when Shota went over to it, Izuku noticed that it had steam coming out of the top. Inside the bowl was a bunch of vegetables and some sort of brown water. It smelled funny to Izuku's nose, but not in a bad way. It actually made his mouth water a little bit as he looked down at the stuff in the bowl. When Izuku reached his hand down, Shota batted it away. Hot. Bad. Hot. Hot. Izuku said, finally giving in to the copy game. The boy reached his hand down once more, only to have it slapped away again. No. Hot. Bad. Izuku knit his brows together, trying to understand. Pants, bad. Izuku said. Pants hot. Hot bad. Shota sighed and shook his head but said no more. Izuku huffed when the word didn't work in his attempt to remove the pants. Shota still wouldn't budge. Yamada. Shota called. The blonde appeared on the other side of the platform quickly. Izuku was passed over to him, passing the sink on his way. He now knew that magic water definitely came out of that nozzle too. He wanted to play with it. Yamada, on the other hand, had other plans. The blonde alpha took Izuku away from that area, setting him on the couch and plopping down next to him. When Izuku's hands moved to the waistband of his pants, the man batted them away with a firm no of his own. Izuku's lower lip extended in a pout as he looked at the man. Come now, little listener. Don't look at me like that. Come on, we can play a game. Izuku had no idea what he said, but the happy tone had his ears perking up. Yamada clapped his hands together and looked at Izuku expectantly. Izuku copied. Then, Yamada held his hands out, palms facing Izuku. Izuku copied. Then, with very little warning, Yamada brought their hands together. A clap that used two people. Izuku flinched back at first, but after a few times of Yamada doing this, Izuku started to understand. Each clap made a different sound, and when put all together, it made an almost melodic sound. It was also extremely fun, especially when Yamada tried to do the clap stuff faster and faster. The two made a few different beats, eventually adding in their feet to stomp on the ground and the couch to make a duller sound. Izuku couldn't stop his laughing fit after a while, and the sounds of his joy added to the sounds of the beat. The boy completely forgot about his strife with clothes. Shota, our little listener, is musically inclined. Yamada cheered when Aizawa entered the room, holding 3 bowls of the rice and vegetable stew. Delightful. Aizawa deadpanned. Since when is he our little listener and not your little listener? Taking claim already? Yamada blushed faintly before turning his head in a pout. He is only my responsibility when it comes to his taste in music and fashion. The rest of that parenting stuff is all you. I didn't sign up for a kid. Neither did I. Aizawa grumbled, more to himself than the blonde. Aizawa presented one of the bowls to Izuku and then brought out a spoon and fork for the boy. He and Nizu had been getting him familiar with the tools since his second day, though the boy still preferred using his hands. Aizawa had a feeling that the heat from the food may make him more likely to use utensils this time. Before Izuku could dig in, Aizawa stopped him. Hot. He warned. Hot. Bad. No. Izuku said. Food, bad? No, it's just hot. Good, but hot. Aizawa tried to clarify. It only proved to make Izuku look more confused. Aizawa, though he preferred using chopsticks, picked up the fork he had gotten for himself and put some food on the fork. He blew on the food and then put it in his mouth carefully, hoping the boy would catch on. Of course, Izuku did not. The boy completely ignored the utensil and stuck his hand straight into the bowl only to draw it back with a sharp, high-pitched yelp, flicking his hand roughly and flinging stew every which way. He whimpered as the steaming thick liquid stuck to his skin. Aizawa quickly poured some of his water over the child's hand, not caring about the floor getting wet at this point. Hot. Aizawa said again, hoping the boy would understand now that he had learned the hard way. Izuku whimpered and nodded his head. Hot bad. Hot hurt. Yes. Sometimes. Shota. You couldn't have warned him. I did. I told him it was hot. But he didn't know that word. Now he does. Yamada pouted at the black-haired man but eventually turned back to his own stew. The boy watched as Aizawa and Yamada ate a few bites of his meal, head tilting slightly. Shota, food hot. Hot hurt. Shota hurt? No, Aizawa said softly. I use a fork. Yamada snorted. Just because he uses a fork, doesn't mean it won't be hot. Maybe, but the smaller pieces can at least be blown on. Yamada rolled his eyes. Aizawa placed the fork in Izuku's hand and helped him put food on the end. Then, Aizawa blew on the food and watched as Izuku did as well. When Aizawa tried to guide the fork to Izuku's mouth, the child resisted. Hot hurt? Not anymore. No. Izuku looked at him in disbelief before carefully tilting the contents of the fork onto his hand. He hummed in happy surprise when it didn't burn, shoving the food into his mouth. Izuku copied the motion throughout the rest of the meal, using his fork to get the food, blow on the food, dump the food into his hand, and then eat. It wasn't exactly correct, but it was better than Aizawa and Nizu had achieved thus far. Aizawa was pleasantly surprised that the boy didn't put up a fuss about the food. It was the first warm meal the child had ever really had and he didn't seem bothered by it at all. A voice in the back of Aizawa's mind reminded him that it technically wasn't the kid's first warm meal. He'd eaten plenty of freshly killed rabbits not long before, the blood still holding the body temperature from when the animals were alive. It wasn't so different from having a hot meal, was it? When the food was gone, Aizawa took Izuku to the sink and washed off his hands and face, again. The boy's hand was slightly pink in some areas from the slight burn of the stew, but Aizawa guessed the mark would probably be gone by tomorrow. Shota, he doesn't look very tired. He slept most of the afternoon, what did you expect? How are you going to get him on a normal schedule? I have a feeling I'm going to need to start praying to the gods to get him to do anything after the clothing fiasco. Aizawa grumbled. For now, I don't mind if he's up half the night. That's my schedule anyway. That's awful, Sho. Children need consistency. A healthy schedule. Are you offering to take over? Definitely not. I offered to help you the first night, but I don't want a kid right now. Aizawa sighed. He had a feeling that Yamada hadn't really thought through the words he'd been saying today. He had a feeling that eventually, it would click with the other man. But for now, Aizawa left him in the dark. Yamada didn't want a kid. Aizawa was pretty sure he would end up with this kid for longer than he hoped. If Aizawa had a kid, and Yamada didn't want one, where did that leave them? They were supposed to move in with each other next month. Now they might not even be together by then. DMN Nizu. It was his fault that Aizawa had been landed with this child. DMN the scientists for doing this sheet to this kid. DMN Yamada for not seeing what his words really meant. DMN himself. It was his own fault that he grew attached so easily. Chapter text. Izuku was growing tired of the countless mimic sessions that Nizu pushed on him. It had been days and days since Izuku had been taken home, far longer than the time he had spent in the hospital. And every day, Nizu came by and drilled for what felt like hours and hours. The days had fallen into a predictable lull that, although appreciated, were also quite boring. Izuku was usually the first to awaken. He would spend time in his personal den, of which Shota and Nizu insisted he call a room. There was lots to explore, though his favorite things were the picture books on the shelf. The drawings inside were a lot like his flashcards, but they seemed to tell a story. In one, a two-leg climbed up a tree that went into the clouds. And up in the clouds, he met an even bigger two-leg. Then, something happens with a goose who must be sick, because its eggs were gold. Either way, this story was one of Izuku's favorites. Nizu preferred Izuku look at the ones with weird symbols on each page. These often had a picture to go along with it, but the symbols that Nizu pointed at held no interest for Izuku. And yet, anytime Izuku motioned towards the shelf, Nizu would pick the same boring books and make Izuku mimic shorter sounds. When Shota looked at the books with him, usually after dark, Izuku got to choose. The one with the giant two-leg was chosen often. Every time Shota would take the book, he would start saying long meandering flows of words which Izuku didn't really understand. But his voice was soothing to the boy by now, and it would often cause Izuku to drift off to sleep. Because he rarely finished the book the night before, this was usually his first stop in the morning. Each page was inspected thoroughly as the child tried to make sense of the story being told. After a while, Izuku usually needed to potty. After the first few times that Izuku went in the wrong spot, Shota had shown him how to use the final object in the bathroom, the toilet. Izuku had quickly learned the word after a day of constantly being asked if he needed to use it. The first time Aizawa had shown him what to do, he had sat Izuku atop the seat and simply waited. They sat for a solid 10 minutes before the alpha had sighed and let Izuku get up. A while later, he had repeated the process. When Izuku tried to find a corner of the house that wouldn't be in the way of their living, Shota had quickly scooped him up and carried the child in cat form over to the bathroom. It took a while, but eventually Izuku got the idea. When Shota showed him to flush, it was a whole new world. The water and waste went down the same way the bath water did, but there was a much larger hole in this object. When Izuku stuck his hand inside to try and follow where the water disappeared to, however, Shota had quickly pulled him away with a sharp no. The entire idea of a toilet was pretty stupid from Izuku's point of view. The toilet flushed away his scent markings and wasted the most potent scent he could make. It caused the boy to circle his room and the entire home far more often now that he wasn't permitted to scent mark the right way. Despite this flaw in using the toilet, it made Shota happy. So, Izuku used it anyway. Besides, playing in the sink after using the toilet was always fun. Izuku tried his best to make as many bubbles as possible in the sink, despite the water disappearing very quickly. It was usually during his time playing with the bubbles that Shota would get up and come into the bathroom. The alpha would huff when he entered, turn the branch that made the water stop, and then guide Izuku back to his room. Izuku hated this part. Every time they reached Izuku's room, the dreaded clothes would make an appearance. Shota let him choose which ones he wanted to wear now, but he had to wear them and keep them on all day. It was torture. Like choosing which punishment he wanted to receive. Originally, Izuku had been forced to wear pants every day. The annoying fabric would be off within an hour, often leading to a long day of fighting between Izuku and Shota. Izuku often tried to use his animal form as a way to not have to put clothes on, but Shota would just get mad and suddenly, Izuku would be forced back into his human form again. The woman, Kayama, that often visited the home had brought a different type of clothing with her. These were a lot like the giant shirt Izuku had first been placed in. They were more fitted, but not uncomfortable. Izuku could move freely in them, at least, unlike the pants. Plus, without all the extra fabric, Izuku could play much more easily. The only issue was that the bottom would get caught whenever Izuku tried to crawl. Shota preferred Izuku to stay up on two legs, though, so it was a good reminder whenever Izuku forgot. The options for clothes today were between a green dress and a red one. Izuku sighed and flopped to the ground, keening loudly at having to choose. Even if the dresses weren't as bad as pants, they were still annoying and Izuku needed to make sure that Shota understood he didn't like them. Even if Izuku would eventually comply, his opinion needed to be stated so that Shota would see that he was going to grow up to be a dominant member of the pack, and that he was worth keeping around. Come on Izuku, just choose. Don't fight me again. No. Izuku yelled, struggling against the alpha. No Shota. No clothes. No dress. Please, Shota. No clothes. Yes, clothes, the alpha replied, tugging Izuku's arm and forcing the boy to be still. You have to wear clothes. Izuku didn't understand all of the words, but he got the general idea of what Shota wanted from him most of the time. The alpha was incredibly bad at reading body language, but most two-legs were. Thus, Izuku had to constantly verbalize his own meaning and hope that the other understood. Shota had decided to just go with the green one since Izuku wouldn't choose. Izuku was fine with that. He liked the green one best of all the other dresses. It let him blend in better with the forest when he couldn't change to an animal with fur. It also had things called pockets where he could put little treasures that he found throughout the day. The only treasures he wasn't allowed to put in the pockets was food and anything gooey. Those things always made Shota scold him. Izuku whimpered as the green dress slipped over his head. He groaned and huffed as loudly as he could whilst Shota pulled his arms through the holes in the garment. Shuitea, Izuku whined, keening high in his throat. No. Shota only sighed and shook his head. Izuku had quickly learnt that that meant either no or that Shota was done with the conversation, so the boy merely pouted in response. Underwear had been a relatively new occurrence of which Shota had yet to be successful in making Izuku wear all day long. However, the man did not receive a fight. This morning. Izuku could tell the man was already in a bad mood, the strange feeling in the air making his pitiful human fur stand on end. For Izuku, he had put up plenty of a fight already. No reason to make the alpha mad. He could just ditch the uncomfortable piece of fabric later, preferably when they went outside. Shota never made Izuku put things back on if he put dirt all over them. After the dreaded clothes were on, Shoyuta would put Izuku in front of the box. The box was very special to Izuku and he was only allowed to watch it once a day, right before breakfast. The box was this black thing that Hizashi had brought with him one day. It usually had a cold, shiny surface that showed Izuku's reflection, but when Shota did something with the thing called a remote, the screen lit up with pictures. Bright colorful things showed up and they sang songs and said words that Izuku could usually understand. His favorite thing on the screen was a green character with big floppy ears that reminded Izuku of the rabbits he used to spend time with. The ones he had to, but he needed to survive. Pack laws make that permissible. The green character was singing his song, of which Izuku could mimic almost perfectly now. The boy sang along as best he could and clapped with the music just as Hizashi had taught him to do. Mi du ragi to tuemo de chi. Izuku sang, jumping up from his spot to cheer with the invisible voices coming from the black box. Shota snorted from behind him and Izuku turned to grin. A soft smile was returned, permitting Izuku to turn back and watch the show. As the characters danced and played, Izuku would copy their motions. He used the pillows to be his friends and copied what the green one with floppy ears did. It was a little frustrating since pillows didn't have hands that interacted back, but Izuku knew how to make do with what he had. He made ears that looked the same as the character and added the small nuances to his play that the green one on screen was severely lacking. How would his friends know he was being playful and not hostile if he didn't twitch his ears and nose correctly? How would he not be seen as a threat without the proper posture and stance? What the characters in the box lacked, Izuku made up for in his play. He was trying to teach them, just as they taught him the two-leg things. The characters on the other side of the box were not good at picking up the cues he was giving, however. It reminded Izuku of Nizu. Breakfast, Shoyuta called as the ending song played. Izuku ignored him in favor of finishing the tune and putting the pillows back on the couch correctly. Shota never minded much if he didn't come immediately, so long as he was putting things back how they go. Izuku took advantage of that and went as slow as possible so he could hear the whole ending before having to go to the table. Once the song ended, Izuku went and sat in the chair he was supposed to sit in and Shota turned the box off, leaving only a black screen behind. Izuku huffed when the man did so but didn't put up any complaint. For all the boy knew, the beings on the other side of the box disappeared after it was turned off, anyway. Eat, Shota said. Izuku knew that word very well. He looked down at the food around him and picked up the fork he had to use. He didn't use his hands anymore unless he thought he could reasonably get away with it. Shota got huffy when he did. He wanted Shota to be happy. So he ate with his fork, even though it was hard and tried his patience. And he used the napkin when Shota gave it to him, wiping his face clear of any food. He didn't even lick the napkin anymore, despite it being a waste of good nutrients. He was a good boy. At least, that's what Hizashi called him when he followed all the rules right. Shota didn't talk much, but the slight relaxation of his face was all the encouragement Izuku needed in order to know that he had done well. After breakfast, Shota put the more annoying clothes on Izuku. It was all strappy and Izuku had yet to figure out how to get it off. Shota held onto another strap, preventing Izuku from running off to explore. Shota never took it off until the big gates closed behind them when they entered the main territory. The main territory was where Izuku's new forest was. Shota and Nizu were there a whole lot, and Hizashi and Kayama were too. A bunch of other members of the pack roamed around at times as well, but Izuku mostly stuck by the alpha. As soon as the gates shut, Izuku would typically be released to go play in the forest for a while. Izuku had been growing quite bored of the area recently, though. There were so few animals and no water or big rocks to explore. He had climbed pretty much every tree already, and the area was pitifully small compared to the forest in his last home with the wolves. It was nice to be out in nature. It was nice to smell the fresh air and feel the dirt beneath his nails, but he was bored. And he was alone. Today, when Shota brought him out the door, Izuku did not run ahead and have to be tugged back. Instead, he walked side by side with the man. His hands tangled in the dark suit that Shota wore, and he hummed to himself a little, talking to Shota as best as he could. Izuku good? Yes, you are being good, Izuku. Izuku play? We will play when we get inside the gates. Shota play? I will play with you for a little bit, but then I need to teach a class today. Izuku, animal, change? No. Not today. Why? Because I can't watch you for long. Maybe tomorrow. Izuku good? Yes. Izuku, change animal? No. Izuku sighed heavily but didn't ask again. That no had been said with a tone that meant Izuku would lose if he fought with the alpha. Izuku learn? Yes. You will study with Nizu today. No. Learn Shota. Izuku learn Shota. I can't teach you, I have class. You will be with Nizu. Izuku groaned low and long. By this point, the two were almost at the gates of the territory. Izuku play whole time. No, you need to do your lessons. You need to learn. Izuku learn little bit. Play lots. That's up to Nizu. The boy whined. Nizu bad. Nizu no play. Sorry, kiddo. Shota bad, Izuku grumbled as the gates closed behind them. Shota huffed deep in his chest but didn't reprimand Izuku. Aizawa leaned down to unbuckle the boy, but instead of running off immediately like Izuku normally did, the child paused. Izuku, good? Shota, teach Izuku. Please. Aizawa's heart ached as the boy used a word he rarely used correctly. Every day, the young child seemed to make more and more progress. It had been a little over a month and the two of them had fallen into a nice routine that seemed to benefit not only the boy, but Aizawa as well. He wasn't as tired, though that may be due to his lack of nightly patrols. He had yet to go back into hero work, too nervous to leave the boy home alone for so many hours. Yet, Aizawa was itching to get back into things. Yes, Izuku's progress was encouraging and filled Aizawa with joy, but it didn't compare to the thrill of stopping crime. Aizawa had never wanted to be a parent. He wouldn't give Izuku up unless it benefited the boy, even then it would be difficult, but parenthood had been forced onto him. When it came to hero work, however, he had wanted and worked hard towards that goal, and he would be dead if he let his job as a hero be forcefully taken away. It was times like these, when Izuku didn't immediately run off the first chance he got, when the boy actively attempted conversation, when he tried to clarify his wants and needs, that Aizawa thought that he might be able to go back on patrol. Aizawa shook his head free of his thoughts when the boy in front of him tugged at his scarf in order to gain attention. Izuku good? Shota teach Izuku please, the child said more confidently. Izuku is good, but Nizu is teaching you today, Aizawa said calmly. The boy in front of him scrunched up his face, a pout forming on his lips. In an instant, the boy turned and sprinted off into the woods. Aizawa had a sinking feeling the child would be in animal form the next time he caught sight of him, despite having been told no. Aizawa walked in after the boy, finding a discarded dress and underpants relatively quickly. He folded them up and tucked them into his bag before moving further into the woods in search of green fur. It didn't take long to find him, as Izuku typically became bored quickly. Within a matter of minutes, a green fox trotted up to Aizawa, flicking its tail as it passed as if to say, "Look at me, I am my own person and I have my own will." Of course, Aizawa wasn't even sure that Izuku knew what free will was. Who knew if the boy could understand complex topics? Who knew if he would ever be able to discuss any level of philosophy? Aizawa didn't believe the boy to be stupid, but he had read previous studies on feral children. Izuku's odds were not great in him ever being able to live a normal life. It was things like this that made Aizawa hesitate in leaving the boy alone. He was the only solid connection the child had. Would the boy feel abandoned if he left at night? Would he be lonely? And if Aizawa was being honest, what if he never came back after? He was a hero and the job held risks. What if he left one night and never came back? The boy may never trust another again. The green fox before him was currently digging a hole, paying no mind that the dirt was spraying all over Aizawa. Once dug, the child nosed Aizawa's bag and the hero quickly clamped the thing closed. No, he said firmly. Izuku had buried his clothes one too many times for Aizawa to not know this trick by now. The green fox geckered, in other words, laughed, before pouncing away. Being cute doesn't mean I won't be upset, Aizawa grumbled as he took a seat. You weren't supposed to change into an animal, Izuku. The same sound came from a bit away, indicating the boy had heard. Aizawa merely sighed and sat down on a fallen tree. It was too late to change the kid back now. Might as well let him have his fun. He can let Nizu do the scolding. I see you allowed him to be in animal form. I thought we agreed only the human form today, Nizu said as a greeting. Aizawa humphed, handing the leash of the pouting child over to the principal. He decided not to listen. I haven't had time to scold him. Is your quirk not that of erasing other quirks? I lost sight of him for a bit, Aizawa shot back lazily. Nizu huffed but conceded the fight before even starting. Izuku growled at the disrespect but didn't do anything further, knowing better than to attack by now. Nizu looked at the boy with a stern expression when the child tried to follow after Aizawa. The man commanded the boy to stay and listen, but Nizu knew better than to expect much from the child today. Izuku tried his best with Aizawa, but if he already disobeyed the man today, Nizu had no hopes of controlling the boy for long. Thus, he changed his game plan. Izuku, come. Let's go play, Nizu invited. The child, who had previously been whimpering, looked up hopefully at the principal. Play? Izuku play? Yes. I am taking you to go play. But you must walk, or we will learn instead. Nizu was pleasantly surprised to see that the child walked calmly by his side, not tugging on the lead at all as they traversed the halls. Instead of leading the boy out to the acre of woodland, Nizu took the boy into a training room. Nizu had been working on the space for a while. Half the room was that of forest. All of the natural items were fake, of course, but Nizu had spent a hefty sum to ensure that the smell in the room would be as natural as possible. There was a section of dirt, sand, grass, and even a pool filled with unchlorinated water. On the other half of the room was a large area full of toys and household objects. A full playset of basic household objects was available to be explored, as well as copious amounts of stuffed animals, baby dolls, blocks, Legos, and many other items that Nizu could use to help teach the boy human ways. A section was set aside that mimicked a typical classroom. Nizu would wait before making the boy play there until he showed interest. Perhaps after sitting in on a few of Aizawa's lectures when the boy became more tame. Izuku seemed apprehensive as he looked about the room. He sniffed the air and got down on all fours, pawing at the flooring. The child continuously looked at Nizu as he slowly explored the space. Izuku, animal? Yes. That is fine, Nizu conceded. Best to let the child feel comfortable in the area. Izuku chose to transform into his wolf form, ears twitching every which way. Nizu merely sat back and allowed the boy free rein. As he explored, Izuku used Nizu as a sounding board. He would branch out to a corner of the room before trotting back to Nizu and choosing a new section to explore. This, of course, was very common for both animals and men to do when they were young. They used one they trusted as a point of reference and comfort when placed in an unfamiliar situation. Thus, Nizu continued to allow the action. Many basic human instincts were that of the animal kingdom, after all. This new room was much larger than most of the rooms Izuku was brought to. However, it was still quite small compared to the forest. There was a lot to explore, but first he needed to pin the perimeter. Once the room was cleared, Izuku moved on to sniff at the different objects. The soil was rich, but clearly lacking any beneficial greenery. The grass was fake like the grass in his room. The trees were not real wood and the pond water was overly still. There wasn't even a single fish in its depths. On the other side of the room, everything was familiar, but not. There were objects that he often saw Shota use, but they were small, more to fit his size. They also didn't seem to work. These things did not light up or feel warm like the ones in Shota's den. They were lifeless, just like everything else in the room. Izuku didn't like it. Once he had scouted the area, he quickly changed back into his two-leg form and went to Nizu. Leave. Izuku leave. Izuku learn. Nizu's ears twitched in a way that immediately had Izuku whimpering. The man was disappointed. Even though he wasn't fond of Nizu, when the animal man was disappointed, Shota usually ended up disappointed too. Izuku didn't like it when Shota was disappointed. Shota might leave. He might leave Izuku all alone. Izuku didn't want to be alone. He hated alone nights. He hated alone times. Izuku hastily grabbed at his dress and tried his best to put it on himself. Perhaps this was why Nizu had been upset. The animal man helped Izuku put the clothes on properly, but his ears were still slightly back, showing his continued displeasure. Izuku keened and put the undergarment on too before looking back at Nizu once again. The thing seemed to be studying him. Izuku. Nizu leave, Izuku said desperately. Izuku learn. He pulled at the two-leg animal in an attempt to get him to take him to the classroom with open windows, but Nizu didn't budge. No, we are going to stay here. We are going to play. Izuku shifted nervously. He didn't like this area. He felt trapped. The smell was wrong and there was no fresh air or natural things to put him at ease. At least in the room where he normally learned, Izuku was allowed to feel the breeze from the window, so long as he didn't go close to it. And there were lovely, real plants to fill the air. Didn't Nizu realize how small this fakeness made the room? Come, Nizu directed, walking over to the area with the Izuku-sized objects from Shota's den. Izuku slowly trailed behind the animal man, cat ears forming on his head instinctually so he could listen out for trouble in the eerie silence. The only time the forest was ever this silent was when something bad was coming, like a terrible storm. Nizu showed Izuku one of the stuffed items that Shota doesn't let him play with alone anymore. Apparently, chewing on them in wolf form or in human form was not the way to play with the item. This one was purple and looked like an animal that Izuku had only seen in the books from his room. It had large ears and a long nose. Its body was fat, and quite frankly, Izuku wasn't quite sure how it was supposed to survive when it was so chubby. It couldn't possibly be fast with those stubby feet. Elephant, Nizu said. Izuku murmured the word back softly, hoping that if he listened, they could go back to the normal room. He would promise not to complain ever again if he knew what words to use. Nizu frowned at the response and Izuku shrunk back. Had he said it wrong? Would Nizu tell Shota? Would Shota be upset? Nizu put the elephant down and took out a different toy. It was blue and shaped like a fish. Izuku had never seen that type of fish before, but it certainly looked interesting. It had a black spot on the top of its head, almost like it was supposed to be a hole. Wouldn't fish drown if they had holes in their heads? Whale, Nizu said calmly. Izuku mimicked. Nizu frowned again and set the object down next to the elephant. The man said a jumble of things that Izuku didn't understand yet as he dug through the bin. Eventually, he pulled out a brown wolf. Izuku could tell immediately, despite the small toy being so different from real wolves. Its fur was very clearly not real and it held no warmth. Izuku growled at it. That was no wolf. It was fake like everything else in this room. How dare that thing imitate as if it were a true wolf? Izuku was way more wolf than that. He wanted to destroy it. Izuku's hands twitched towards the toy. Nizu perked up at this and handed it over cautiously. Izuku growled at the thing again. It needed to change back to what it was supposed to be. All of these things should change back to what they were supposed to be. If Izuku had to be a two-leg, then these things should also be their original forms. Izuku shook the toy, trying to force it back to its original state. He stared at it long and hard like Shota sometimes did when Izuku was forced back into his two-leg form. When that didn't work, Izuku pulled, trying to make it hurt. Only, when he pulled, the strange stuffing spilled out, just as had happened with the ones at Shota's den. These things were obviously quite weak. Nizu hummed in disapproval and Izuku backed down, throwing the fluffy white nest lining off of himself. He understood they weren't living. They had no heartbeat. No energy. But they seemed to hold some type of power to be able to hold all these different shapes. Thus, they must have some type of meaning in life, yes? Had he just killed something innocent? He couldn't even feed off its flesh. Perhaps he was supposed to use the bedding that came out from it? Nizu shook his head and pulled out a new one. This one was pink with a purple tail tip. Izuku thought it might look like a fox if not for its color. Fox, Nizu confirmed. Izuku knew that word. He knew fox, wolf, cat, and bear because Shota made sure he learned them. He wanted to tell Izuku what he could and couldn't be at certain times, so he had taught Izuku the names of his favorite shapes. Izuku huffed a little at the thought that that pink monstrosity could actually be a fox. No. Not fox, Izuku said with a shake of his head. Yes. Fox. Stuffed fox. Izuku grinned at the animal man a bit. Considering how highly the alpha placed Nizu, and how much he knew about two legs, the poor thing was really quite stupid. Not fox. Izuku fox, Izuku said, shifting his ears to be that of the creature in question. He pointed at the appendages, fox, and then pointed at the thing in Nizu's hand. Not fox. Nizu shook his head. He pointed at Izuku's ears, fox. Then he pointed at the thing in his hand, stuffed fox. Then he pointed to the whale. Stuffed whale, and then the elephant, stuffed elephant. Izuku groaned, leaning down to mess with the white fluff on the ground. Stuffed, he mimicked. Yes. Yes. Nizu cheered. Izuku looked up in question at the happy tone, then looked down at what was in his hands. He grabbed for the whale, and very slowly, while looking at Nizu to make sure it was okay, pulled the whale apart. The same white fluff was inside, just as he had expected. Stuffed, Izuku said. Nizu nodded. Stuffed must be the name of these things. Perhaps Nizu would explain their use next. At that thought, Izuku sat down in front of the animal man and pointed at the toys. Why? Stuffed animals are used in play, Nizu said. Izuku knit his brows together. Those things didn't play. They couldn't move. They didn't have a heart or meat or anything that would help them be alive. Nizu shook his head and pulled out another toy. This one was also a wolf, but Nizu didn't let Izuku tear it up. Instead, Nizu tucked it close to his chest, just as Shota did for Izuku. A hug. He handed the toy over, and Izuku copied the motion. It felt odd to be hugging something so small, but it was also soft and squishy. Izuku grinned a bit at the feeling. Nizu took out another toy wolf and cradled it in his arms. Izuku leaned over to see the bin Nizu was pulling the stuffed things out of. Just how many stuffed wolves were there? He could have had a whole pack. Nizu snapped to get Izuku's attention and cradled the wolf again. Izuku copied. Then, Nizu made it look like it was running. Izuku copied. Then, Nizu did something most peculiar. He howled. It wasn't even a good howl. The noise had no purpose and his posture was completely off. Instead, he held the stuffed wolf, making it look like the fake wolf had been the one making the sound. Izuku did not copy. Howling is only for the alpha or a grieving mother to begin. Pups and prey were certainly not permitted to start such an act. Was Nizu being disrespectful on purpose? Was he looking for a fight? Izuku would surely not be in trouble for upholding the pack's honor by dueling this rude being. Then again, this animal man never seemed to understand wolf customs. Shota never howled either. Perhaps, he simply did not know the ways. No, Nizu, Izuku said, bad Nizu. The white one looked taken aback by the words but nodded anyway. I apologize. I'm sorry. Izuku searched Nizu's gaze for honest sincerity and yipped happily at the apology when he found it. It seemed Nizu really hadn't known. For a good part of the rest of the day, Nizu continued showing Izuku the animals. He continued making silly sounds that honestly made no sense, but it was also kind of amusing. It reminded Izuku of small pups who couldn't yet hear. After the stuffed animals, Nizu moved them over to the kitchen. There was a lot of fake food in this area and Nizu pretended to cook how Shota did, despite the food not being real. Izuku actually liked this one, because he got to show Nizu all the things he'd learned from watching Shota. He turned the dials on the stove, pointed to the fake stove top and warned Nizu it was hot. He put a pan on the top and then pretended to make an egg. After that, Nizu continued to encourage him to practice. Perhaps, this was the test before Izuku was allowed to use the kitchen all by himself? As of right now, Shota never even let Izuku step into the kitchen unless the alpha was with him. Eventually, Nizu had Izuku help clean up, a task that Izuku was already quite good at after he had emptied all his drawers a few times back in Shota's den. Then, it was lunch. The real lunch, with real food. Nizu led Izuku outside into the grass and Shota joined. Izuku had to keep the strappy thing on when they were outside, but he didn't mind it in exchange for fresh air. The stuffiness of the room below had been pushed to the back of his mind, but the boy still didn't like the feel of the room. It was fun playing with the toys, but he preferred the feel of outside, even if he wasn't allowed to roam free. For now, Izuku enjoyed the feel of the sun against his face and the breeze blowing in his hair. Shoyuta and Nizu were talking about something much too quickly for Izuku to understand, so the boy simply ate the food he was given and sat watching the surrounding area. Shota's pack was incredibly large. There were more members than Izuku could even think to remember. They all gave the alpha and Nizu a wide berth whenever they ate outside. But every now and then, Shota would snap at one of them when they were playing. His hair would raise and his eyes would burn red in the way that meant business. The play usually ended right away. Most of the members of the pack were just reaching maturity. The hormones let out in the air were a confusing mix for Izuku and gave him a headache if he focused on them for too long. Emotions ran wild in the confines of the territory and no one seemed worried about reining those in. In the animal world, things like this were usually tempered to some extent but the two legs didn't even seem to notice. Perhaps this was why the pack was allowed to get so big. Shota didn't take notice of the potential threats around him. Many of the males around here flaunted their superiority and it set Izuku off. How dare so many challenge the alpha? Then again, it wasn't like Shota ever told them off. Many of the females gave off similar vibes, but it was rarer. This was common when a male led the pack, of course. Males, for a reason that Izuku still couldn't understand, often reacted in a more hostile manner than females when there was a male head. Perhaps it was how they were taught. Perhaps it was simply in their being. Either way, Izuku wasn't too fond of the uppity nature these almost adults showed. He wished Shota would do more to tame his pack. Izuku knew Shota was a great leader. He knew that Shota was strong and smart. But letting the pack show off like this may be a sign to others that he is weak. It could lead to attack. Izuku jumped when a burst of flame flashed in his peripheral vision. His head turned just in time to see a boy stand off across from another. The other boy had funny spikes emitting from his body like a porcupine. In an instant, the flames and spikes dispersed. Izuku looked back at Shota to find the man's hair flying once more. He beckoned the boys over and talked to them in the low dangerous voice he used when Izuku did something dangerous. The boys bowed and apologized before hurrying away quickly. Shota wouldn't have these issues if he would control the pack more from the get-go. But Izuku was a pup. It was not his place to question Shota's leadership skills. At least the alpha knew how to keep things under control when they started to get out of hand. A group of females that often hung around the area was looking at Izuku again as they often did when he got to eat outside. They laughed and squealed happily as they spoke in loud voices. Shota usually paid them no mind and Izuku tried to do the same, but they always waved at him and called attention to themselves. Shota always frowned disapprovingly at the girls when they did this, but it didn't stop them from doing the same actions daily. Today, one of the girls stepped forward. Izuku's muscles tensed when he noticed that she was examining him. He backed up a little so that Shota would protect him should something bad happen. Then, he growled a small warning. The girl hesitated at the sound and Shota's head shot around to stare her down as she cautiously approached. The students had been warned to stay away from Izuku anytime he was out and about. They had been told that Shota was his caretaker and that Izuku's quirk was too volatile for him to be left alone. Of course, there had been a little less info than that, since Aizawa had been the one to send out the school-wide email. I shall be taking care of a child henceforth due to the volatile nature of said child's quirk. If you see me with a kid, do not approach unless I give you permission. The child is easily frightened and I don't want to have to deal with it if you set the kid off. Aizawa. Aizawa had thought his stern demeanor would be enough to have Izuku be left alone, but it seems, the curiosity of teenagers won out against his threatening nature. The girl was a second year. Aizawa had only had her in a handful of classes and she had proven to be capable and intelligent. Thus, it was a wonder to the man as to why she was the one making her way over when he had Izuku with him. Sensei, the girl greeted. Futura-san, Aizawa replied. Is there an urgent matter you need help with, or are you simply disrupting my lunch for fun? Futura stumbled back a step at the cold welcome but pulled herself together quickly. She clasped her hands and raised her chin, giving a warm smile to Izuku before looking at Aizawa kindly. I just wanted to say that your daughter is very cute. I think it's wonderful you took her on. Nizu cackled from his spot on the blanket and Izuku growled low in his throat once more. Aizawa sighed. It doesn't concern me how you feel about my life choices, Futura. Now, I would like to eat my lunch in peace. Fat Era ignored Aizawa's coldness and stepped forward a bit more, pulling out a length of crocheted fabric from her bag. I made her a scarf since it will be getting cold soon. I was wondering what her name was, or should I just call her Aizawa-chan? Izuku backed further into Aizawa, keening in his throat a little at the girl's nearness. Look, kid, Aizawa started, only to be interrupted by Nizu. This is Izuku. The boy huddling close to Aizawa looked up at the sound of his name. I think it was quite nice of you to make something for Izuku-kun. He isn't used to kindness from new people. Perhaps you can show him you are safe, Futura-san. The girl hesitated for only a moment before she very slowly leaned down. I suppose it would be Izuku-kun then. It's nice to meet you. I'm Futura Omi. Here, this is for you. Futura gently nudged the scarf near Izuku and then slid back a bit. The boy looked at the thing and then up at Futura in question. Why? Ah? To keep you warm. You wear it? Izuku scrunched his face up and withdrew his hand from where it had been petting the scarf. No clothes. Fat Era merely laughed. Think of it more like a blanket. To keep you warm when it's cold. Bedtime? Izuku asked, head tilting. Aizawa snorted a little but said nothing more. If Nizu thought Izuku was ready to branch out, Aizawa would allow him to test it out. So far, the kid had been doing pretty good too. He was wary and very obviously using Aizawa as a comfort for his unease, but he was talking, and being relatively civil. Not for bed. It's a blanket that you can have during the day. Izuku looked back at Aizawa for assurance and the hero nodded, motioning for the boy to take the scarf. Izuku carefully placed a hand on the item and drew it back quickly, as if afraid the girl would steal it back suddenly. What? Futura looked a little confused at the question, so Aizawa clarified for the girl, he's asking what it is. He doesn't know the word. Oh. It's a scarf, Futura said happily, catching on quickly to the situation. Scarf, she repeated slowly. Scarf, Izuku mimicked as he studied the object. The boy laid down on the blanket and put the scarf over his body like you might a blanket. The move made Izuku snort with laughter when he noticed how small it was compared to the blankets he was used to. In less than a second, Izuku was gone. Futara sked in a surprised breath, and Aizawa scrambled to look through the pile of clothing for the rodent that Izuku had surely transformed into. The boy had changed into a ferret and was currently snuggling up under his new scarf with a happy trill. Is that his quirk? He can change into a rat? That, my dear, is a ferret, Nizu corrected. He can change into any mammal? I think. Aizawa explained as he tapped Izuku on the nose. And he isn't supposed to use his quirk without permission. The ferret Izuku trilled again, rolling onto his back and curling up in the scarf. The little thing pulled back its cheeks and squinted its eyes, smiling wide with its pointed fangs on display. He's cute, Futara cooed. The girl reached out a hand to pet Izuku and Aizawa immediately stopped her. Just as he did so, Izuku changed, his wolf form separating Aizawa and Futara as the boy hunched low, growling angrily at the girl. Futara yelped as she fell back from her squat. Aizawa activated his quirk and Izuku was back in his human form, shaking like a leaf and very clearly put off by the sudden transformation. The kid whined and turned to Aizawa, hiding himself in the hero's chest for protection. Don't touch him, Aizawa warned far too late. This is why I told you all to stay away. I'm not taking responsibility if one of your students gets hurt because you invite them to interact with the brat before he is ready, Aizawa said the last part to Nizu. The principal merely hummed a noncommittal reply and waved the slightly shaken student away. Izuku continued to whimper into Aizawa's chest even after Futara had walked off. Kid. Izuku. You're fine. It's safe. Izuku shook his head, not safe. Never safe. Aizawa had nothing to say to that. The kid's words were true for the kid. Aizawa couldn't deny what he felt. The best he could do is comfort the boy in the moment and hope that eventually, Izuku would understand that most people were not a danger. It is things like that that make me think it essential he start to be introduced to others. Perhaps, we can try one new person a day, Nizu suggested. Aizawa rolled his eyes at the man. As I said, I'm not responsible if someone gets hurt.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.